Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Secrets channel. Tonight we step quietly into a medieval encampment where the cold does not simply surround you, it seeps into everything you are. You might imagine brave soldiers resting easily after a long march, but the truth is far less comfortable. How did they survive nights when frost crept into their boots and breath turned to mist in the air? What secrets kept them from freezing beneath open skies far from any hearth or home? So before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and as you listen I'd love to know where you are in the world right now, and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights. You arrive as the last glow of evening fades behind a jagged line of distant trees. The sky deepens into a heavy blue, and the air sharpens with every passing moment. Around you a scattering of tents and rough shelters stretches across uneven ground, their shape softened by gathering darkness. The earth beneath your boots feels stiff, almost brittle, as if it has already begun surrendering to the cold night. A faint wind brushes past your face. It carries the smell of damp soil, wood smoke, and something faintly sour, perhaps unwashed wool or leather, left too long in the elements. You pull your cloak tighter without thinking, your fingers already stiffening. The cold is patient here. It does not rush. It simply settles in. Nearby, a group of soldiers crouches around a small fire, its flames flickering uncertainly. The wood pops and cracks, sending brief sparks upward before they vanish into the dark. You hear low voices, muted laughter, the soft clink of metal as someone shifts their armor. The sound is strangely comforting, a reminder that you are not alone in this wide-open chill. But the fire is small, too small. In medieval armies, fuel was often scarce, especially during campaigns far from settled villages. Soldiers could not always rely on steady supplies of firewood, and what little they gathered had to be shared carefully. A large blaze might seem ideal, but it would consume precious resources too quickly, and risk revealing the camp's position to enemies lurking beyond the hills. So the fires remain modest, controlled, almost reluctant. You edge closer, extending your hands toward the warmth. For a moment, relief washes over your skin as heat touches your fingers. It feels fragile, like something that could disappear at any second. Behind you, your back remains cold, untouched by the fire's reach. You shift slightly, trying to balance the warmth, but it never quite spreads evenly. This is how it works. The soldiers know this dance well, rotating positions around the fire, turning slowly like figures on a quiet stage. No one lingers too long in the best spot. There is an unspoken rhythm, a shared understanding that warmth must be borrowed, not owned. Above you, the first stars begin to appear sharp and distant. The sky is clear tonight, which might seem beautiful, but it carries a hidden cost. Clear skies allow heat to escape more easily, letting the temperature drop further as the night deepens. It is a small detail, but one that every experienced soldier would recognize with a silent sigh. Historians generally agree that medieval soldiers were far more exposed to the elements than we often imagine. While popular images show neat rows of tents and organized camps, reality was often far messier. Many soldiers slept in the open, especially in large armies where supplies and equipment were limited. And tonight you are one of them. A man beside you adjusts his cloak, pulling it over his shoulders and tucking it tightly around his legs. The fabric looks thick, likely wool, one of the most valuable materials for retaining heat in the medieval world. Wool has a quiet advantage. Even when damp, it can still provide some insulation, unlike linen, which quickly becomes cold and heavy. You notice how carefully he wraps himself. Nothing is left loose, no gaps for the wind to slip through. It is a small act, but it matters. Further across the camp, someone coughs, a dry, persistent sound that echoes faintly in the night air. Illness spreads easily in conditions like these where bodies are stressed and warmth is scarce. Cold itself does not cause sickness, as modern science would later clarify, but it weakens the body, making it easier for infections to take hold. The wind shifts again, stronger this time. It brushes through the camp, tugging at cloaks and stirring the fire into a brief, frantic dance. You feel it immediately, a thin blade of cold slipping through the layers of your clothing. It finds the smallest openings, the spaces you did not even realize were exposed. You shiver, just once. Then again, There is no real escape from it, only management. Some soldiers move about not out of restlessness but necessity. Remaining still for too long allows the cold to settle deeper into the body. A slow walk, a gentle stamping of feet, even the act of adjusting gear can help maintain a fragile warmth. Movement becomes a kind of defense, subtle but essential. You try it yourself, shifting your weight, flexing your fingers. The sensation returns slowly like pins and needles, reminding you that warmth is something you must actively maintain, not passively receive. Interestingly, there are scattered accounts suggesting that some soldiers believed certain charms or rituals could protect them from the cold. A small token, a whispered phrase, or a particular way of wrapping a cloak might carry meaning beyond practicality. Whether these practices had any real effect is uncertain, but they offered something just as important: comfort, control, a sense of agency in an uncontrollable environment. Scholars still debate how widespread such beliefs were among ordinary soldiers, or whether they were more common in specific regions or units. The records are incomplete, often written by those far removed from the daily struggles of camp life. What remains is a patchwork of hints, leaving room for quiet speculation. The fire beside you begins to shrink slightly as the wood settles into glowing embers. Someone adds another piece, carefully placed, coaxing the flames back to life. The light flickers across faces, revealing tired eyes, weathered skin, and expressions that hover somewhere between resilience and quiet resignation. No one complains loudly. There is an understanding here. This is simply part of the experience. The ground beneath you grows colder as the night deepens. You can feel it through your boots now, a slow creeping chill that rises upward inch by inch. It reminds you that warmth is not only lost to the air, but to the earth itself, which draws heat away with silent efficiency. You glance around, taking in the scene one more time: the dim fires, the clustered figures, the vast open darkness beyond the camp's edges. It is a quiet kind of hardship, not dramatic, not sudden, just constant. And as you settle into this moment, you begin to understand the first truth of these freezing nights. Staying warm was never about comfort. It was about endurance, patience, and a series of small, careful choices repeated again and again until morning finally arrived. The night stretches on, and you remain within it. The fire fades behind you as you step away, its warmth lingering only faintly on your skin. Almost immediately, the cold reclaims its space, pressing in from every direction with quiet determination. You become more aware now of what lies beneath your outer layers, the hidden system that stands between you and the freezing air. Clothing in this world is not a matter of fashion, it is survival. You shift your shoulders slightly, feeling the weight of layered fabric moving with you. Beneath your outer cloak there is a tunic, and beneath that another layer closer to your skin. Each piece serves a purpose, even if it appears simple at first glance. The trick is not thickness alone, but how the layers work together to trap warmth. Air, you realize, is the true ally here. Medieval soldiers understood, even without modern science, that multiple layers could hold pockets of air close to the body. These pockets warmed gradually, creating a barrier against the cold outside. A single heavy garment might seem sufficient, but several lighter layers often performed better, especially during long nights in the open. You slide a hand between your cloak and tunic, feeling the subtle difference in temperature. It is not warm exactly, but it is less cold. And in these conditions, that distinction matters more than you might expect. Most soldiers relied heavily on wool for these inner layers. It was not soft in the way modern fabrics are often coarse and slightly scratchy against the skin. You can feel that texture now, a faint irritation that never quite disappears. Yet wool had one critical advantage. It retained heat even when damp, making it far more reliable than linen in unpredictable weather. Linen, though common, had its limits. It was lighter and more comfortable in warmer seasons, but in the cold it could become a liability. Once wet linen clung to the body, drawing heat away rather than preserving it. You can imagine the discomfort of wearing it on a freezing night, the fabric turning from a protective layer into something almost hostile. A soldier nearby adjusts his sleeves, pulling them down tightly over his wrists. You notice how carefully he secures every opening, ensuring that no skin is exposed. Even the smallest gap can allow cold air to slip in, undoing the work of all those layers. It is meticulous work, and it never really ends. Armor complicates everything. If you're expecting it to provide warmth, you would quickly be disappointed. Metal does not hold heat in any comforting way. Instead, it absorbs the cold, pressing it inward against the body. Wearing armor in freezing conditions can feel like wrapping yourself in winter itself. To counter this, soldiers wore padded garments beneath their armor, often made from layers of fabric stitched together. These garments, sometimes called gambesons, served multiple purposes. They cushioned the body from blows, reduced chafing, and importantly added a layer of insulation. You imagine the weight of it all. The cloak, the tunic, the padding, the armor. It is not light. Every movement requires effort, and yet removing any part of it risks losing precious warmth. A faint rustling sound draws your attention. Someone is lying down nearby, carefully arranging their clothing before settling. They pull their cloak around themselves, tucking it under their body and over their shoulders, creating a kind of cocoon. It is a practiced motion, one that suggests long experience with cold nights like this. There is no wasted movement. Interestingly, some accounts hint that soldiers would sleep in nearly all their clothing even when it felt restrictive. Removing layers might offer brief comfort, but it also meant facing the cold again in the morning when garments had chilled overnight. Keeping everything on preserved a small but vital reserve of warmth. Historians generally agree on this habit, though there is some debate about how consistently it was followed. In certain regions, particularly where winters were milder, soldiers may have been less strict about such practices. But in harsher climates, the risk of exposure left little room for compromise. You shift your stance, feeling the fabric tighten slightly across your shoulders. It's not entirely comfortable. The layers restrict your movement just enough to remind you they are there. Yet that restriction brings a strange reassurance. It means you're protected at least as much as possible in a place like this. The wind passes through the camp, again softer now, but no less persistent. It brushes against your outer cloak, testing its edges, searching for any weakness. You instinctively pull it closer, overlapping the fabric more tightly across your chest. A simple adjustment, but it makes a difference. The smell of wool fills your senses, faintly earthy, mixed with the lingering scent of smoke from the fires. It is not unpleasant, just heavy, grounding you in the reality of the moment. This is what survival smells like here. A blend of materials and effort worn and reworn over countless nights. You glance down at your hands, noticing how the fabric bunches slightly at your wrists. Even this small detail matters. Loose cloth can allow air to circulate too freely, carrying heat away. Tightening it helps keep that warmth close, preserving it in those delicate layers between skin and cloth. There is a quiet ingenuity in all of this. No grand invention, no dramatic solution. Just careful use of what is available. Some soldiers, you recall hearing, would even stuff additional material beneath their clothing when temperatures dropped severely. Scraps of fabric, bits of straw, anything that could create extra insulation might be used. It was not elegant and certainly not comfortable, but it could mean the difference between a restless night and one that was truly dangerous. Scholars still argue about how common such improvisations were. The evidence is scattered, often anecdotal, and varies widely depending on the army and region. Yet the idea persists, suggesting a level of adaptability that is easy to overlook when imagining the past. You take a slow breath, watching it form a faint cloud in the air before disappearing. The cold feels sharper now, or perhaps you are simply more aware of it. Either way, your layers hold maintaining that fragile balance between you and the night. Not warm, but not freezing. Sing. And here that is enough. In the distance, a fire crackles softly, its light flickering against the low shapes of tents and figures. You can hear the murmur of voices, the occasional shift of movement as soldiers settle in for the long hours ahead. Each of them wrapped in their own layers, their own small defences against the cold. You are part of that quiet system now, one thread in a larger fabric of survival. And as you stand there feeling the weight and texture of every layer you wear, you begin to understand something deeper. Warmth in this world is not given freely. It is built piece by piece through knowledge, habit, and constant attention. The night continues to unfold around you, and your layers hold firm. You draw your cloak closer as the night settles more deeply around the camp, the air now carrying a sharper, almost metallic chill. The firelight behind you flickers weakly, and you instinctively turn away from it, knowing its warmth will not follow. What remains with you instead is the weight draped across your shoulders. Your cloak! It feels heavier now than it did at dusk, as if it has absorbed the night itself. The fabric presses down, gently wrapping around your back and arms, offering a kind of shelter that moves with you. You adjust it again, pulling one side across your chest, overlapping the edges carefully to block the wind. This single garment does more than it seems. In the medieval world, the cloak was not merely an accessory. It was one of the most essential tools a soldier possessed when facing the cold. Thick wool cloaks, often coarse but durable, were designed to provide both mobility and protection. Unlike fitted garments, they could be wrapped, folded, and reshaped depending on the need. You feel that flexibility now. A gust of wind slips through the camp, low and steady, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and distant frost. You angle your body slightly, letting the cloak take the brunt of it. The fabric flutters briefly before settling again, its weight anchoring it against you. For a moment, the cold lessens. Not gone, just softened. Nearby, another soldier adjusts his cloak in a different way, pulling it over his head like a hood. The edge falls low over his brow, casting his face into shadow. It is a simple adaptation, but an effective one. Heat escapes quickly from the head, and covering it can make a noticeable difference during long freezing hours. You follow his example, lifting part of your cloak to shield your own head. The world narrows slightly, your field of vision framed by rough wool. The sound of the wind becomes quieter, dulled by the fabric. Even the distant murmurs of the camp seem softer now, as if you have stepped into a smaller, more contained space. It feels safer somehow. Cloaks also served another purpose, one that becomes more apparent as you watch the camp settle further. A few soldiers begin preparing to sleep, lowering themselves carefully onto the ground. They spread their cloaks beneath them or wrap them tightly around their bodies, transforming them into makeshift blankets. You notice how deliberate their movements are. One man folds his cloak in half before lying down, doubling its thickness beneath his torso. Another pulls his cloak entirely around himself, tucking the edges under his legs and shoulders to trap as much warmth as possible. Each technique reflects a quiet understanding of how to conserve heat with limited resources. There is no single method, only what works. Historians widely acknowledge the importance of cloaks in medieval military life, though the exact styles and materials could vary significantly depending on region and status. Wealthier soldiers might possess heavier, better crafted cloaks, sometimes lined with fur, for added insulation. Others may do with simpler versions worn thin from repeated use. You can feel the difference in quality just by looking. Some cloaks hang thick and dense, their folds heavy and substantial. Others appear lighter, their edges frayed, offering less protection against the biting air. Yet even the simplest cloak remains valuable, a barrier that stands between the body and the relentless cold. A faint crackle draws your attention as a nearby fire shifts, sending a brief glow across the camp. The light catches on the surface of your cloak, revealing its texture more clearly. The fibers are rough, uneven, but tightly woven. You run your fingers along the edge, feeling the slight resistance beneath your touch. It's not comfortable in the modern sense, but it endures. There are even suggestions scattered through historical records that some soldiers treated their cloaks with oils or fats to improve their resistance to moisture. Whether this was a widespread practice remains uncertain. The evidence is inconsistent, and scholars continue to debate how common such treatments might have been. Still, the idea lingers. A small enhancement, a practical experiment. The wind shifts again this time, circling around you in a slow, deliberate motion. It finds the edges of your cloak, testing its coverage, searching for any opening. You respond instinctively, pulling the fabric tighter, overlapping it more securely across your chest and shoulders. You are learning, not through instruction but through sensation. The cold teaches quickly. As the night deepens, you begin to notice how the cloak affects your movement. It restricts you slightly, encouraging slower, more deliberate motions. Sudden movements risk exposing parts of your body to the air, allowing warmth to escape. So you adapt, moving with a quiet caution that mirrors the stillness of the camp. Everything becomes measured. Even your breathing feels more controlled, each exhale visible for a brief moment before fading into the darkness. You draw the cloak closer with each breath, maintaining that delicate pocket of warmth around your body. A soldier passes by his cloak, trailing behind him like a shadow. For a moment you catch the scent of damp wool and smoke, again stronger this time. It lingers briefly before dissolving into the cold air, leaving behind only the faint memory of it. It is a familiar scent now, one that speaks of survival. In some regions, particularly in colder northern climates, cloaks could be supplemented with additional layers or fastened in specific ways to improve their effectiveness. Brooches or pins were sometimes used to secure them more tightly, preventing them from slipping open during the night. You glance down, imagining such a fastening at your own shoulder. It would help you think, keep everything in place. Small details, quiet advantages. Yet even without such additions, the cloak remains indispensable. It is one of the few items that serves multiple roles without compromise. Protection from wind, insulation against cold, bedding when nothing else is available. A constant companion. You shift your weight again, feeling the fabric settle more comfortably around you. The initial stiffness begins to fade, replaced by a subtle familiarity. The cloak no longer feels like an external layer, but an extension of your own body responding to your movements, adapting as needed. The camp grows quieter now. Conversations fade into murmurs, then into silence. The fires burn lower, their light dimming as the night reaches its deepest hours. Around you figures lie still, wrapped in their cloaks, their forms blending into the darkened ground. You remain standing for a moment longer, taking it all in. The stillness, the cold, the quiet resilience of those around you, and the simple, heavy fabric resting on your shoulders. It is not perfect. It does not banish the cold entirely, but it stands between you and something far worse. And as you pull it tighter once more, feeling its weight and warmth settle around you, you begin to understand why this humble garment held such importance across centuries of hardship. The night continues vast and unyielding, but your cloak holds. The fire sputters weakly, casting trembling shadows across the frozen camp. You step closer, letting your fingers hover over the fading warmth. It is fragile now, like a fleeting thought, a reminder that heat is never guaranteed here. Every spark, every ember matters. You hear the soft crackle as a small piece of wood collapses into glowing ash. The smell of smoke curls into your nose, dry and slightly bitter, mingling with the crisp scent of frost settling on the earth. Even this faint aroma seems comforting, a fragile bridge between warmth and the surrounding cold. You realize how much humans rely on such small cues for reassurance in hostile conditions. Fires in medieval camps were rarely grand. Unlike the roaring hearths of castles, these were modest, carefully tended. Soldiers could not afford to waste precious wood, especially during winter campaigns. A large blaze might last longer, but it risked drawing unwanted attention from scouts or enemies nearby. So they burned slowly, sparingly, feeding the flames little by little. You crouch closer, feeling the heat brush your face. It is uneven, fleeting, retreating toward the center of the embers. Your fingers feel the difference immediately. One side touched by warmth, the other still chilled. You adjust your position instinctively, turning slowly to share the small comfort across your body. The fire is more than warmth, it is strategy. A soldier behind you murmurs to another, their words low, careful. Conversations in the cold carry little energy, constrained by both fatigue and shivering muscles. Sound itself seems subdued here, absorbed by layers of clothing and the soft hush of falling frost. Every movement is deliberate. Nothing is wasted. You notice how even breathing is measured shallow, at times to preserve heat, yet you are not alone in your attempts. Others move subtly around the fire, hands hovering close to its surface, feet shuffling to avoid the cold ground. There is an unspoken rhythm, a choreography born from necessity. Each body is both source and receiver of warmth, an intricate dance against the night. You sense the fragility of it, one misstep, one ember lost, and the balance shifts. Historically, campfires were supplemented with small tools to extend their usefulness. Charred logs, stones heated in the flames, even the careful placement of shields to block wind could maintain warmth longer. You imagine stacking these small items with care, coaxing the fire to last as long as possible. It is a quiet, almost meditative task requiring patience more than strength. Occasionally sparks leap from the embers, floating briefly before fading into the darkness. You watch them rise, thinking about how fleeting heat can be in such a world. It is a reminder that survival is never guaranteed. It is something earned moment by moment through constant vigilance and adaptation. You notice the wind shifting again, sneaking through the camp. It brushes the fire, tilting the flames, carrying away warmth in thin streams of air. You pull your cloak tighter, leaning slightly forward to shield yourself. The fabric flutters, stubborn but yielding just enough for the cold to test your defences. Each gust feels sharper, more insistent, but you counter it quietly, almost unconsciously. Some soldiers even built small windbreaks around their fires. Earth mounds, piled rocks, or scattered shields could help shield the flames. It is improvisation born of experience, a recognition that a little ingenuity can preserve warmth in ways that sheer clothing alone cannot. Historians still debate how often these methods were used, given the varying terrain and availability of materials, but the concept is consistent. Fire was precious and conserving it was a priority. You bend slightly, observing a soldier gently rolling a log closer to the centre. The movement is deliberate, careful. Too quick and sparks might scatter, too slow and the fire might die. Every motion counts. Even the smallest act has weight. The smoke drifts upward, tangling with the stars above. It carries with it the sense of the camp smoke, frost leather, and damp wool. Each smell becomes more pronounced in the cold, sharper, and yet strangely comforting. They remind you that this is survival in its rawest form, unembellished and demanding. You realize that fire also serves as a psychological anchor. The cold is unrelenting, but a flickering flame offers reassurance. It reminds soldiers that warmth exists, if only briefly, if only carefully tended. Some even spoke quietly to it, murmuring small comforts, ritual that feels as much mental as practical. Nearby, a few embers glow stubbornly, their heat radiating unevenly across the camp. You position yourself so that your back absorbs it, then your sides turning slowly as if rotating with the sun. It is not a perfect solution, but it works. Not warm, not constant, but enough to survive the night. You notice a subtle shift in your senses. The cold seems sharper when unguarded, softer when near heat. Sound becomes muted near the fire and shadows deepen, creating a private bubble of relative comfort. You lean into it, appreciating its fragile security. It is the small things that matter most in these hours, and yet the fire will not last forever. Eventually the embers will fade, leaving you with only the layers, the cloak, and your own ingenuity to guard against the cold. You breathe slowly, letting the warmth seep briefly into your bones, understanding that it is temporary but precious. For now the fire endures, and you are grateful for it. The night deepens, and you find yourself inching closer to the cluster of soldiers who have gathered for warmth. Their presence offers more than conversation or camaraderie. It offers shared body heat, a simple but surprisingly effective strategy against the relentless cold. You notice how they huddle together, shoulders brushing knees tucked close, every small movement calculated to preserve warmth. It is an intimacy born of necessity, not comfort. You join them cautiously, adjusting your cloak to minimize exposed gaps. The air between bodies is slightly warmer, carrying faint scents of wool leather and human sweat. Even in the biting cold, that mixture is oddly reassuring. It speaks of life continuing despite the harshness of the environment. You shift slightly, letting your back rest against someone else's arm, feeling a subtle pulse of warmth radiate through the fabric. This shared heat was crucial, especially when fires were small or distant. Soldiers quickly learned that a well-positioned huddle could stave off frostbite in ways that Clothing alone could not. Some accounts describe entire groups sleeping shoulder to shoulder, their movements choreographed to maintain maximum coverage. It is a form of survival almost forgotten in modern life, where personal space is sacred and warmth is taken for granted. You sense the rhythm of the group. There is no chaos here, only a quiet, almost instinctive coordination. Arms rest lightly across shoulders, legs overlap where space allows, and every adjustment is made with the collective goal of staying warm. Even the smallest gap can let the cold seep in, so attention is constant but unspoken. Your body quickly adapts to the flow, learning to trust and contribute to the warmth around you. Occasionally someone shifts a soft rustle of fabric or a quiet sigh, but the group remains largely still. It is an almost meditative state, each person focused inward and outward, simultaneously aware of their own needs and those of the others. You feel a gentle security in this collective vigilance, a sense that you are not facing the cold alone. The shared warmth becomes as much psychological as physical, a reassurance that you are part of a living, breathing system of survival. You inhale, slowly noticing the faint scents blending around you. Smoke from the distant fire lingers, but the dominant smell is human wool, unwashed leather, and the subtle tang of skin is intimate in a way that surprises you, grounding you firmly in the reality of life in a medieval camp. These odours, once considered unpleasant, now become markers of safety and presence. Interestingly, historians suggest that some units relied on these huddles as much as on clothing or fires. There are anecdotal accounts of soldiers developing unspoken techniques for maintaining warmth within the group. For example, rotating positions during the night to ensure each person gets a chance in the warmer centre, or adjusting the placement of cloaks to optimize insulation. Such practices highlight a combination of ingenuity, observation, and social cooperation that is easy to overlook. You shift your position slightly, noticing the subtle pressure of someone's shoulder against yours. The warmth transfers gently, a reminder that the body itself can be a tool of survival. You flex your fingers and feel the difference immediately. The heat is soft but persistent, radiating in slow waves through your limbs. It is comforting, even grounding in a way that fire alone cannot replicate. There is also a psychological aspect at work. In extreme cold, loneliness can intensify discomfort and fear. Being part of a huddle even silently provides a sense of belonging and security. Soldiers were acutely aware of this, often prioritizing shared sleeping arrangements, not just for warmth, but for morale. The human presence became as critical as clothing or fire, reinforcing endurance against the night. You notice a slight rustle as someone adjusts their cloak, tucking an edge beneath another body. The movement is minimal but deliberate, a subtle gesture that maximizes insulation. You mirror the action, learning unconsciously how to contribute to the collective warmth. It is a small, almost ceremonial practice repeated night after night across countless campaigns. Some historical sources hint at regional differences in this practice. In northern climates, huddling might have been essential every night, whereas in milder areas it was used more sparingly. There is still debate among scholars about how structured these arrangements were, whether soldiers followed set rotations or relied on instinct, but the underlying principle remains clear. Proximity saves lives in told. You shift slightly, feeling the subtle compression of fabric against your body. Even in the dark and silent camp, you're aware of the careful layering of cloaks and padding around you. Every fold and tuck contributes to warmth. Every shared touch a small defensive measure against the night. You marvel at the quiet sophistication of these simple methods, born of experience and necessity rather than formal instruction. The wind drifts softly through the camp, but it finds no purchase here. Bodies pressed together, cloaks layered and overlapping, form a barrier more effective than any single item of clothing. The subtle heat radiating from human presence spreads evenly, filling gaps that the fire cannot reach. You sense the cooperation, unspoken yet profoundly effective, and you allow yourself to relax slightly into the collective warmth. Around you, quiet sighs punctuate the stillness. The faint sounds of movement, shifting feet rustling fabric, blend into a rhythm almost musical in its consistency. The group remains attentive without conscious effort, each individual contributing to a shared goal. You feel your muscles loosen, the tension from the cold easing as you become part of this intricate network. You realize that warmth in these nights was rarely solitary. Clothing and fire provided layers of defense, but it was the human element that bridged the gaps, offering both physical and psychological comfort. And now nestled in the center of this huddle, you understand that survival in the freezing night was as much about connection as technique. The night stretches ahead, still dark and still cold, but here, pressed together, with the soft murmur of breath and the subtle heat of bodies, you are not alone. The cold persists, yes, but it is tempered by proximity and cooperation. You breathe slowly, feeling the warmth circulate gently through your limbs, carrying a fragile reassurance that the world for now is bearable. And in this white and shared cocoon, you learn one of the oldest truths of human endurance. Sometimes the simplest remedy for the harshest nights is simply being together. The ground beneath you is hard, uneven, and unyielding. As you lie down, a thin layer of frost crunches faintly under your weight, a subtle reminder that the earth itself has become an extension of the cold. Every movement transmits its chill upward, seeping through boots, padding, and even layers of wool. You shift carefully, trying to create the smallest barrier possible between skin and frozen soil. You notice immediately how difficult it is to find comfort. Even with cloaks wrapped around you and padding beneath the earth draws heat away relentlessly. Soldiers quickly learned that insulation mattered as much as layers on the body. Straw leaves or even spare cloth were gathered and spread beneath sleeping areas to reduce direct contact with the frozen ground. It is simple, crude, but remarkably effective in practice. The smell of damp straw mixes faintly with the persistent scent of wool and leather. It is earthy, slightly sweet, yet tinged with the sharp bite of frost. You inhale slowly, the aromas grounding you in the physicality of this space. Survival, you realize, is never abstract. It is texture, smell, and weight all combined in a delicate balance. You adjust your body again, rolling slightly to distribute weight evenly. Each shift is measured. Abrupt movements risk losing the tiny pocket of warmth you have managed to gather. Your cloak now doubles as both blanket and buffer against the ground folded beneath your torso, to add thickness, then wrapped over your legs to trap residual heat. Even this modest adjustment makes a perceptible difference. Historians note that sleeping directly on the ground was one of the harshest challenges soldiers faced, especially during prolonged campaigns in cold weather. Some accounts suggest that those who could fashion rudimentary bedding from straw or spare cloth had significantly better chances of avoiding frostbite or lingering discomfort. The improvisation itself speaks to a quiet resilience, a daily ingenuity honed under pressure. You notice the subtle sounds around you. The soft rustle of a cloak as someone nearby shifts, the faint crunch of frost under cautious footsteps, and the distant whisper of the wind threading between tents. These noises become almost musical, a rhythm that lulls the senses even as the cold persists. There is a curious comfort in these quiet details, as if the world has sewed just enough to accommodate the endurance required. You feel the cold pressing upward through your boots, finding its way into every crevice. Movement helps, but only so much. Soldiers often kept their legs slightly bent or crossed, minimizing surface area in contact with the frozen ground. Each posture, each adjustment is a subtle form of resistance. Comfort in this context is tactical as much as physical. You notice the communal aspect of sleeping arrangements. In some camps, soldiers clustered together on shared bedding or piles of straw, creating collective insulation. Proximity not only preserved warmth, but also reinforced morale. A solitary body on the frozen earth would quickly succumb to shivering both physically and mentally. Humans, you realize, are surprisingly effective heaters when aligned intentionally. Some evidence suggests that soldiers even adapted in other ways, tucking their hands beneath thighs, pressing their shoulders against companions, or curling tightly to conserve body heat. There was no single prescribed method, only an ongoing trial and error negotiation between body clothing and environment. Scholars still debate how standardized these techniques were, as accounts vary widely across regions and campaigns. You adjust your cloak, again feeling the weight of it settle more snugly across your chest and torso. Every fold traps a small pocket of air, a fragile buffer against the relentless frost beneath. You realize that the layers you carry are not merely fabric, they are your first line of defense against the sleeping cold. Even a small gap could allow heat to escape, amplifying discomfort with almost cruel efficiency. The wind shifts, whispering faintly through tent flaps and between tightly packed soldiers. You hear it more than you feel it now, the fabric of your cloak absorbing some of its force. Every edge tucked carefully, every fold aligned, contributes to a delicate equilibrium. It is a constant negotiation, subtle and ongoing, one that requires patience more than anything else. You notice how small details matter. Tucking your cloak beneath your head can act as a pillow, while maintaining warmth or folding extra fabric beneath your knees can reduce contact with the frozen ground. Each adjustment seems minor, but in combination they form a surprisingly sophisticated approach to sleeping in the harshest conditions. It is a quiet ingenuity that centuries of Kaniska. Some soldiers even use spare boots or mittens as small pads beneath their bodies, creating additional layers of insulation. These improvised solutions were never comfortable, yet they were often the difference between tolerable nights and dangerous exposure. Historians still debate how common these practices were, as surviving records are fragmentary and inconsistent. Nevertheless, the concept reflects an inventive spirit quietly woven into the mundane routines of camp life. As you lie there adjusting once more, the sense of isolation begins to soften. The bodies around you, each tucked and layered in their own defences, create a subtle shared warmth that travels across the cluster. The cold is still present, insistent, but the combined effect of cloaks, padding, and close proximity creates pockets of relative comfort. You feel these ripples of heat, faint but perceptible, spreading slowly across your bodies. The night stretches on, silent and patient. The earth beneath you remains cold, but the adjustments, both physical and social, give you something to anchor to. The process is ongoing, tactile and hypnotically repetitive, shifting, tucking, layering and breathing slowly. Each action is a quiet affirmation of endurance, and as you settle into this rhythm, the ground seems slightly less hostile, the cold slightly less absolute. You understand in a subtle, intimate way that surviving the frozen nights was a careful balance of preparation, observation, and cooperation, maintained minute by the minute until the first light of dawn finally breaks. You run your fingers over a rough patch of animal hide, feeling the dense texture beneath your touch. Its edges are stiff and slightly coarse, yet the material exudes a subtle warmth from being worn and handled. Soldiers prize these furs not for comfort alone, but for their remarkable ability to trap heat in ways that ordinary fabric could not. Each piece is a miniature fortress against the cold layered carefully beneath or around the body to maximize insulation. You imagine the painstaking process of acquiring these hides. Hunting, trading, or salvaging from fallen animals, each skin had its own story and utility. Some were thick wolf or bear pelts prized for their resilience, while others came from sheep or goat, softer, but still effective. The scent of leather and fur is sharp in the cold air, mingling faintly with smoke from nearby campfires. It carries a primal reassurance, warmth, survival, endurance. You adjust a sheepskin beneath your body, the thick wool pressing against your back. Even on frozen ground, it provides a buffer, a small layer that prevents heat from escaping downward. Soldiers often layered furs, combining materials to cover every vulnerable area: shoulders, torso, legs, and feet. Each layer adds weight, but more importantly it traps air, which becomes an essential ally in the battle against frost. The texture is uneven, a combination of soft fleece and coarser leather backing. You trace your fingers along the seams and edges, noticing where it has been stitched or patched, a testament to its repeated use. In some instances, furs were stretched over rudimentary frames or padded further with straw to improve insulation. Every improvisation mattered, a quiet reflection of ingenuity born from necessity. Nearby, a soldier wraps a bear pelt around his shoulders, the edges falling to his knees. The bulk of it alters his silhouette, making movements slightly awkward, but significantly warmer. You watch him adjust it carefully, ensuring there are no gaps where the cold can seep through. Even a small exposed area like the wrists or neck can compromise the effectiveness of the fur. Attention to detail is constant and unspoken. Historians suggest that the use of furs and skins varied widely depending on social status and access. Wealthier knights might have access to thicker, higher quality pelts, sometimes lined with additional fabrics or decorated for appearance. Common foot soldiers often relied on what they could acquire through necessity, whatever scraps, hides, or worn garments were available. The principle, however, remained the same, trapping warmth close to the body. You notice the faint scent of smoke drifting toward the fur, slightly altering its aroma. It is earthy and comforting, a reminder of the fire that flickers weakly nearby. The combination of heat insulation and scent creates a subtle sensory cocoon. Even the coarse texture seems more tolerable when associated with safety and warmth. Touch, you realize, is as much psychological as practical. Some accounts suggest that soldiers would even repurpose furs to create makeshift blankets or bedding. Draping them over themselves or tucking them beneath their legs extended their utility far beyond simple clothing. The labour involved in preparing these skins, cleaning, stretching and layering, was often overlooked in historical records, but it was essential for enduring nights of bitter cold. The wind sweeps across the camp again, testing the edges of tents and cloaks. You adjust your fur, ensuring that it forms a near-continuous layer between yourself and the freezing air. Even small movements like curling slightly or overlapping folds contribute to retaining heat. Each adjustment feels deliberate, meditative, almost hypnotic in its repetition. A subtle sound catches your attention, the faint scraping of claws on the frost-hardened ground. Perhaps a dog or other camp animal is nearby its presence, adding a curious sense of warmth and companionship. In some units, animals were used not just for labour or guarding, but as portable heaters of a sort, lying close to soldiers, sharing their body heat in an intimate, practical arrangement. You notice the difference in warmth immediately, the fur absorbing the chill and radiating a soft heat back toward you. Your muscles relax slightly, the tension from shivering easing. Even the smallest advantage, like a layer of well-prepared pelts, transforms the experience of the night. What once felt harsh and relentless now becomes tolerable, almost intimate. Scholars still debate the exact prevalence and effectiveness of furs in ordinary soldier life. Some argue that only higher-ranking troops had access to consistent supplies, while others suggest that improvisation and resourcefulness allowed even common soldiers to use hides effectively. The patchwork evidence leaves room for interpretation, but the principle is clear. Animal skins were among the most versatile tools for surviving the cold. You adjust your position again, feeling the wool beneath you compress slightly, conforming to your body. The warmth spreads incrementally subtle, yet persistent, creeping along your sides and across your back. Each tiny gain matters, each fold and tuck of the fur, amplifying the effectiveness of what is at its heart, a simple layer of protection. The night stretches further quiet and deep. The firelight behind you flickers, casting a dim glow across the camp, illuminating those rough shapes of soldiers wrapped in their own layers of furs and cloth. Shadows dance across the ground, softening the sharp edges of reality. And you lie there, cocooned in wool and leather, sensing that the cold is still present but no longer overwhelming. In this simple combination of touch, texture and warmth, you begin to understand the ingenuity of medieval soldiers. Survival is not about comfort or luxury, it is about using every available material thoughtfully, carefully and strategically. A single pelt handled wisely can mean the difference between shivering through the night and enduring it with resilience. And here, pressed into the soft resilience of fur, you feel a fragile sense of safety, a temporary reprieve from the relentlessness of frozen nights. You step into the narrow space of a medieval tent, the fabric walls swaying gently in the cold night wind. The air inside is slightly warmer than outside, though not by much, carrying the faint musty scent of wool and leather, mixed with the lingering aroma of smoke from a nearby fire. The ground feels uneven beneath your boots, and you notice immediately how little separation exists between you and the frozen earth. Tents are a fragile shelter, a small buffer rather than a true refuge. The material around you, linen or heavy canvas, is thin compared with modern expectations of insulation. You reach out, brushing your hand along the wall, feeling its texture vibrate slightly with the wind. Every gust makes the fabric ripple, carrying faint sounds from outside, distant murmurs, the crackling of embers, the whisper of the frost shifting over frozen ground. Inside, the sounds are muted, but not absent, a constant reminder that protection here is partial and fleeting. You adjust your cloak and layers once more, instinctively tucking extra fabric beneath your body where it meets the hard floor. Even with a small fire just beyond the tent flap, the temperature remains harsh. The walls shield against the wind, yes, but they cannot trap heat in any substantial way. The cold creeps through every seam, every small opening, and you feel it probing along your neck and wrists. Some soldiers would construct multiple layers inside their tents, stacking straw hides or extra blankets beneath and around themselves. You run your fingers across a rough pile of straw arranged as a makeshift mattress, noting how it compresses slightly under your weight, yet still offers a noticeable buffer from the frozen ground. These simple adaptations make a night on hard earth marginally tolerable, transforming discomfort into endurance. Historians often argue about the effectiveness of medieval tents. Some sources emphasize their strategic importance, offering temporary concealment and minimal protection from the elements. Others suggest that in harsh climates, tents were little more than symbolic shelter, providing psychological relief more than practical warmth. The truth likely varies depending on region, season, and the resources available to each army. You notice a faint draft curling around the edge of the tent flap. The movement is subtle but persistent, reminding you that no barrier is perfect. You tuck the flap down more securely, pressing your body against the base to block as much air as possible. Small adjustments like these were constant in camp life, a quiet vigilance repeated night after night. Survival required attention to the tiniest gaps where cold might intrude. The inside of the tent carries the combined scent of those who have already settled within it. Wool, leather, sweat, and even the faint tang of recently thawed animal hides mingle in the close air. It is not unpleasant, merely concentrated, grounding you in the physicality of communal life. Smells, you realize, serve as another form of information here, a signal of occupation, warmth, and shared presence. Some soldiers used additional techniques to improve warmth within tents. Stones heated in fires might be placed carefully beneath layers of bedding, radiating residual heat through the night. In other cases, small braziers or charcoal pans were employed cautiously, though the risk of smoke inhalation and fire was high. These methods were not universally used, and their prevalence remains uncertain, but they illustrate the creativity soldiers applied to their frozen surroundings. You shift slightly, curling your body to maximize contact with the straw and furs beneath you. Every adjustment matters. A tucked cloak, a folded blanket, a repositioned pelt can mean the difference between shivering endlessly and maintaining a tolerable level of warmth. You feel the subtle insulation pressing against your back and legs, a quiet reminder of the ingenuity embedded in these small tactile strategies. Outside, the wind rises again, tugging at the edges of the tent, rustling its fabric with persistent insistence. You sense the slight vibration under your fingers and lean closer to the layered bedding for protection. Inside, the world feels contained, yet the cold still finds its way in. It is a battle of patience, endurance, and careful layering rather than brute force. Each small adaptation, every fold, every tucked edge is a defensive maneuver in its own right. You notice the presence of others nearby, their breathing slow and rhythmic as they settle into their own layers. Some adjust quietly, ensuring that cloaks, furs, and straw are arranged optimally. There is no conversation, only subtle movements and the occasional soft sigh. The shared awareness of the cold creates a silent cooperative rhythm that carries through the tent. You feel your own body begin to respond to the layered warmth beneath and around you. Muscles relax, gradually tension easing, as the combination of straw furs and cloaks insulates you from the ground and the swirling drafts outside. Even in such minimal conditions, the human body can adapt, finding micro pockets of heat to cling to as the night deepens. Historians still debate how standardized sleeping arrangements were within tents. Some suggest strict positioning and rotation, while others believe it was largely instinctive, relying on trial and error over successive nights. Regardless, the underlying principle is clear. Even minimal shelter combined with strategic layering and attentiveness significantly increase the chances of enduring freezing nights. You close your eyes for a moment, letting your body sink into the soft resistance beneath you. The cold is still present, pressing gently, but it is now framed by the faint security of fabric walls and insulated bedding. Even fragile shelters like this serve as a critical buffer, their limited protection amplified by careful preparation and the ingenuity of those who know how to use them. And as you lie there cocooned in layers of straw hides and cloth, the night stretches on, vast and relentless, yet slightly softened by the simple quiet shelter of a tent. You begin to sense that survival is not merely about heat. It is about clever use of materials, constant vigilance, and the quiet discipline of habit. Each element of the tent, each fold of fabric, becomes a small act of endurance stitched together to create a fragile, tangible comfort in the bitter dark. The aroma of simmering broth drifts faintly across the camp, blending with the persistent scent of damp wool and smoke. You approach a small pot, its contents bubbling slowly over a dying ember, and inhale deeply. The warmth rises with the steam brushing your face and hands like a soft, fleeting caress. Even a modest meal has the power to restore not just strength, but a subtle sense of comfort against the relentless cold. You ladle a portion into a small wooden bowl, feeling the heat radiate immediately through your fingertips. The liquid is thick and earthy, dotted with chunks of root vegetables and grains, perhaps a morsel of meat. It smells rich and nourishing, a small oasis of warmth amid frozen ground and wind-bitten air. You take a sip, feeling it slide down your throat, and notice the immediate, almost tangible boost in body heat. Eating was far more than sustenance in these nights. It was a strategic act. Soldiers understood that the body's internal furnace needed fuel to generate warmth efficiently. Hot meals, especially those high in calories and fat, provided energy that could be converted into heat, giving a temporary edge against the encroaching cold. Even coarse bread, soaked slightly in broth, contributed to this internal warmth, slow burning and sustaining. You shift your weight slightly, feeling the chill pressing through your boots and tunic. The warmth of the meal radiates, internally countering the creeping cold in your limbs. You notice how important this internal heat becomes when combined with layered clothing and blankets or furs. The body becomes a generator fueled deliberately to meet the demands of a freezing night. Some soldiers even added small amounts of alcohol to their meals, not to seek intoxication, but because heated wine or beer could temporarily warm the body. Scholars still debate whether this practice was common or merely anecdotal, but it suggests a subtle understanding of how internal warmth could be manipulated to advantage. The effects were brief and uneven, yet sometimes enough to stave off early shivering. The camp carries faint murmurs of others eating their sounds, muted by layers of fabric and the hush of night. You can hear the subtle scrape of spoons against bowls, the occasional sigh of satisfaction or fatigue, and the faint clink of metal utensils. These minor noises create a comforting background rhythm, a reminder that others are enduring the same struggles, feeding and finding their own pockets of warmth. You adjust your cloak slightly, allowing it to rest loosely around your shoulders. The steam from the bowl rises, curling into the folds of fabric and adding a small temporary layer of warmth. Every small gesture you notice compounds the effect. Even lifting the bowl carefully to avoid spilling contributes to heat conservation by preventing sudden exposure or drafts. The taste of the broth is plain but satisfying, earthy and slightly salty. You notice how each spoonful seems to recharge not just your body but your awareness. Energy flows gradually into your muscles, limbs that had grown stiff under the relentless cold beginning to loosen. The combination of food and layering works subtly, almost imperceptibly, until you realize you feel steadier, warmer, and more alert. Some accounts suggest that soldiers were mindful of timing their meals to coincide with periods of extreme cold and ensuring the energy from food could be used most effectively. Hot meals at the end of a march or before settling down for the night were particularly valued. There is still debate among historians about how routine this practice was, but the principle is intuitive: a warm body requires fuel. You notice a few soldiers stirring their own pots, coaxing the heat back into the liquid with careful attention. Sparks from embers drift briefly into the air, the faint crackle reminding you of the fire's persistent fragility. Even as you eat, you remain aware of the cold pressing from the ground, from the walls wreaths of the tent, and from the night outside. The body's internal warmth, carefully nurtured with hot food, becomes an active partner in resisting the cold. The subtle combination of smell, taste, and heat creates a sensory comfort that blankets you as effectively as any cloak or fur. Even your shivering diminishes slightly, replaced by the internal glow of sustenance and the knowledge that you are prepared for the hours ahead. The mind and body cooperate in a delicate, ongoing negotiation with the elements. As you finish the last spoonful, the heat lingers in your chest, radiating slowly outward. You adjust the bowl, noticing the warmth seep gently into your hands one final time. It is a small, intimate victory against the persistent cold, a reminder that survival in these nights depended on more than clothing or shelter alone. Food hot and nourishing is a quiet, reliable ally. The night stretches ahead silent and patient, but you feel a renewed sense of resilience. The fire may fade, the wind may press through fabric, and the ground may remain frozen. Yet the warmth generated within you is immediate, tangible, and precious. Every sip, every bite, every careful gesture contributes to the subtle balance of endurance that defines life in a medieval winter camp. You glance down at your clothing, damp from the day's exertions and the occasional drift of snow. Even the thickest wool can only do so much when moisture seeps in, and you feel the chill crawling along the fibers, carrying heat away from your skin. Wet garments are silent enemies, their weight pressing heavily and their cold slowly leaching into your body. You tug at the damp edges of your tunic, wishing for dryness that is rarely guaranteed in a frozen camp. The wind drifts through the camp, again whispering between tents and rustling loose cloaks. Every movement reminds you how moisture exacerbates the cold. Even a minor dampness in boots or sleeves can intensify shivering and fatigue-weakening muscles over hours. You shift your weight, lifting a leg, flexing your fingers, all subtle adjustments to stimulate circulation and counter the creeping chill. Medieval soldiers quickly learned that wet clothing could be more dangerous than the cold itself. Rain, snow, or even sweat from a long march meant garments absorbed moisture, and without modern waterproofing there was little recourse beyond removing layers, wringing them out, or carefully tending them near the fire. You imagine small rituals repeated quietly, wringing cloaks, adjusting tunics, layering furs strategically to shield damp areas. You feel the fabric of your cloak against your skin, noticing how damp patches cling stubbornly. It is uncomfortable, restrictive, and sometimes bitterly cold. Yet even minor adjustments, folding a wet layer under dry one, placing furs strategically, can improve comfort. Survival depends on these small, deliberate interventions repeated endlessly in the hush of the camp. Nearby, a soldier kicks his boots lightly, shifting them to allow air circulation and reduce frost buildup. Movement, however small, is critical when garments are wet. Every inch of circulation helps maintain body warmth. Even so, the sensation of cold persists, a constant reminder that water and snow are more than inconveniences, they are adversaries. The smell of damp leather rises faintly, mingling with smoke from distant fires. It is an earthy, slightly sour scent, peculiar yet oddly grounding. You inhale slowly, letting the familiar odours anchor you in the physicality of the night. The combination of wet clothing, faint smoke, and layered wool forms a tapestry of sensation, reminding you how every element of camp life interacts with the relentless cold. Historians debate the prevalence and management of wet garments. Some accounts suggest soldiers routinely swapped damp items for dry spares if available, while others hint that such luxuries were rare, leaving soldiers to endure discomfort as part of daily survival. The inconsistency in records leaves much to interpretation, but the danger of moisture is clear. It amplifies exposure, exacerbates fatigue, and increases vulnerability to illness. You notice your boots cold and stiff pressing against frozen ground. Feet were often the first to suffer, and wet leather made matters worse. Soldiers sometimes stuffed their socks with straw or cloth to insulate against the damp and cold. Others dried boots cautiously near embers, rotating them to avoid burning the leather. Every adjustment is subtle but necessary. Even the smallest failure could have serious consequences. The chill seems to seep through every layer, yet you are mindful of how movement counters its effects. Flexing fingers, rotating shoulders, bending knees, each gesture stimulates circulation, preserving warmth where static stillness would allow it to dissipate. The cold forces awareness of your body in every moment, creating a constant negotiation between restraint and action. Even sleeping arrangements required consideration of moisture. Cloaks or furs placed beneath the soldier's body could absorb sweat or melted snow, reducing their insulating value for the next night. Layering became a delicate balance, keeping the wet away from critical areas while maximizing warmth. You imagine small rotations of bedding, careful folding, of damp-tooled cloaks, and strategic placement of hides to maintain comfort. Some soldiers reportedly improvised additional coverings, stuffing spare cloth into tunics or around boots to compensate for dampness. Whether widespread or occasional remains uncertain yet, the principle reflects practical ingenuity. When fabric fails, improvisation becomes essential. Historians continue to argue how common these measures were, but all accounts agree that moisture was an ever-present threat. You shift slightly, feeling cold fingers pressing against your sides through damp sleeves. The discomfort is sharp, persistent, and exhausting, yet manageable with careful attention. Every movement, every fold, every adjustment counts in the silent calculus of endurance. You focus on controlling your breathing, letting warmth circulate subtly through your limbs. The wind gusts again, teasing your cloak and probing gaps in your layers. You tighten the edges around your wrists and neck, trapping what little warmth remains inside. Even partially dry layers help slowing the cold's progression. Moisture remains a constant challenge, but the combination of movement, layering, and vigilance provides a fragile, sustainable defense. As the night continues, the dampness is no longer merely discomfort, it becomes a persistent teacher. You learn the limits of materials, the subtle importance of careful folding, and the value of proactive adjustment. Wet clothing is an ever-present hazard, yet managed thoughtfully, it need not overwhelm. And in this quiet attentiveness between layers of wool furs and damp cloth, you sense a fragile mastery over the night, a small repeated triumph against the insidious cold that surrounds you. You bend down and tug at your boots, feeling the stiff leather resist your movements. Your toes pressed tightly within are already numbing from the cold creeping up through the soles. Feet, you realize, are the battleground of winter nights. Every step, every moment of standing or marching carries the risk of frostbite. Even when layered in wool socks or stuffed with straw, the chill finds a way to seep in, relentless and patient. You wiggle your toes, flexing each foot carefully. The sensation is faint at first, a subtle awareness of stiffness and discomfort. Movement stimulates circulation, allowing warmth to creep back into the extremities, though only temporarily. You note how important this small act becomes when standing guard or preparing for the night's rest. Feet, after all, support the rest of the body, and if they fail, the rest quickly follows. Boots were often made of thick leather treated with oils or tallow to resist moisture. Some soldiers layered socks inside, while others improvised insulation with scraps of cloth or straw. You run your hands along the worn leather, feeling its cold rigidity. Despite the protective measures, frostbite remained a constant threat, particularly during prolonged exposure or wet conditions. Even short periods in standing water or snow could make the difference between mild discomfort and serious injury. The scent of damp leather rises faintly, mingling with smoke and earth. It is a smell that you begin to associate with winter survival, a marker of the practical challenges soldiers faced nightly. Every texture, every odour becomes part of the sensory map of endurance. You adjust your boots, slightly tucking the tongue to block a gap where the wind might enter. Such small details are cumulative, forming a critical shield against the night's cold. You notice a soldier nearby rubbing his hands together, then pressing them against the inside of his boots. The motion is slow, deliberate, a combination of massage and gentle heat transfer. Extremities, especially fingers and toes, are the first to betray the cold. Soldiers developed a quiet intuition for stimulating circulation and preserving warmth, using every movement they could spare to stay safe. Some accounts suggest that foot wrapping, strips of cloth wound tightly around boots and socks, were common, adding an additional insulating layer. Others relied on multiple pairs of socks with wool as the preferred material. The historical record remains inconsistent, and scholars continue to debate how widely these practices were employed. Nevertheless, the principle is clear: keeping feet warm was essential for survival. You adjust the layers inside your own boots, pressing straw lightly against the soles, feeling how it creates a soft buffer. The material shifts slightly as you move, distributing pressure while maintaining insulation. Even imperfect solutions make a perceptible difference, the heat of your body trapped just enough to resist the cold pressing upward. The wind shifts outside, brushing across tents and tents' flaps. A low, hollow whistle accompanies the gust, reminding you of the harshness beyond your small patch of layered protection. You instinctively tighten your cloak around your ankles, shielding exposed areas. Every inch of coverage matters, and feet are particularly vulnerable. You imagine long nights where soldiers unable to remove snow or ice endured in near-constant discomfort, relying on small tricks and layered ingenuity to survive. Even standing guard posed its challenges. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, flexing ankles and toes to maintain circulation. The cold bites quickly, and any moment of stillness intensifies the chill. You notice that soldiers sometimes walked in slow circles or shifted their stance rhythmically to keep extremities alive. Every movement is a compromise between vigilance and bodily preservation. Nearby, a low murmur of conversation blends with the soft rustle of cloaks and the distant crackle of embers. Soldiers compare methods for protecting feet wrapping, techniques, materials, and the occasional anecdote about frostbitten toes. There is a shared understanding, a collective knowledge built from repeated experience. You feel part of this quiet exchange, observing the subtle strategies passed along without formal instruction. Interestingly, some soldiers use small furs or animal skins to line boots, creating an additional barrier against the ground's frozen surface. The effectiveness varied depending on availability and quality, but it reflects a principle repeated across medieval winter campaigns. Any material that trapped heat or blocked moisture was valuable. Scholars still argue about the prevalence of such methods, with some suggesting it was a mark of ingenuity among common soldiers, rather than formal practice. You flex your toes again, noticing a slight return of warmth. It is fragile, fleeting, but perceptible, a small reassurance that careful layering and movement can counter the cold's persistence. Even minor adaptations repeated over time accumulate into meaningful comfort. As you stand, the subtle warmth returns to your legs, flowing from feet upward, aided by layers of cloth furs and wool socks. The combination is imperfect, but it works. Your feet, the foundation of every movement, are preserved just enough to endure the night and whatever comes next. And in this quiet vigilance, you understand a simple truth: in freezing nights, it is often the smallest extremities that determine survival. Protect them and the body follows. Neglect them and the cold can claim far more than toes alone. You step lightly through the snow-dusted camp, the ground crunching softly beneath your boots. The night has deepened and the wind carries a sharper bite, now slipping beneath your layers as you take up your post. Night watches are a quiet trial, a test of endurance where the body and mind must remain alert even as shivers creep in from the frozen earth. Every sense is heightened. The faintest sound, the slightest movement can carry significance in the dark. The cold presses against your cheeks and nose and you tuck your cloak higher, shielding as much exposed skin as possible. Even with layers and furs, standing still for long periods allows the chill to settle into muscles and joints. You shift slightly, stamping your feet, flexing fingers and wrists to maintain circulation. Movement becomes a subtle strategy preserving warmth while keeping vigilance intact. You hear the soft rustle of others moving in the camp, whispers and creaks of fabric blending into the hush of night. The distant crackle of a dying fire punctuates the quiet, a reminder of warmth beyond reach. You adjust your stance, leaning slightly into the wind to reduce exposure, your breath visible in faint clouds that drift upward and vanish almost instantly. Historians note that night watches were some of the coldest periods for soldiers. Standing guard required both physical resilience and mental discipline, as inactivity allowed frost to creep into extremities while vigilance demanded focus that could amplify fatigue. Soldiers often rotated posts to mitigate these risks, though the practice varied widely depending on army size, terrain and command. You notice a faint crunch behind you, footsteps on hardened frost. Companion approaches silently moving to take their place at the perimeter. Together you form a shifting line, bodies creating a fragile network of warmth and observation. The proximity of another human offers subtle relief, both psychological and physical. Even small shared heat from breath and body can be significant in the coldest hours. Your hands tucked beneath layers begin to stiffen despite careful circulation. You rub them gently, pressing palms together, rolling wrists slowly. Tiny gestures repeated deliberately stave off numbness. Soldiers learned to anticipate these signs, recognizing early hints of cold-induced discomfort and responding before the chill became dangerous. The night is alive with subtle sounds, wind weaving through tents, the soft scrape of frozen branches, distant murmurs of men settling briefly before returning to their duties. Every noise is magnified in the stillness, each sound a potential signal or reassurance. You focus on these details, letting the subtle rhythm of the camp guide your awareness. Sometimes soldiers carried small improvised tools to help during watches, wrapped furs to press against feet, extra cloth tucked into gloves, or heated stones rotated under layers of clothing. These were not luxurious measures, but practical adaptations, a quiet ingenuity born of repeated experience. Scholars continue to debate the frequency of such techniques, as accounts are inconsistent, yet the principle remains evident. Survival demanded active attention to even minor comforts. You adjust your cloak and layers once again, ensuring that the edges tuck neatly around your torso and shoulders. The wind pushes against it, testing for gaps. Even the smallest opening can allow cold air to infiltrate, undermining hours of careful preparation. You breathe slowly, each exhale forming a brief cloud feeling. Warmth circulate from chest to limbs as your body resists the chill. Occasionally your gaze drifts across the sleeping camp. Figures huddle under furs and cloaks, some sharing blankets, others rotating carefully to conserve warmth. The subtle choreography of survival is everywhere, shifting bodies, tucked edges, careful distribution of insulation. There is a quiet elegance in this constant adaptation, a rhythm of human endurance etched into every movement. You notice how the cold sharpens thought as well as sensation. Vigilance is heightened not just by fear but by necessity. The mind remains alert, scanning for threats while managing the subtle needs of the body. Every adjustment of gloves, boots or cloak is deliberate, almost meditative, balancing the dual responsibilities of survival and watchfulness. Some historical accounts suggest that soldiers even timed small movements during watches, pacing, or shifting rhythmically to preserve warmth without compromising alertness. Scholars still argue whether these practices were systematic or instinctive, but the principle is consistent: in extreme cold, every gesture is meaningful. As you stand quietly, the cold biting but tolerable, you begin to sense a fragile partnership between body environment and routine. Circulation, clothing, subtle movement and shared presence all converge to create a layer of endurance. Each moment of adjustment reinforces a delicate balance that allows the night to pass without surrendering to frost. The hours stretch on, quiet and deliberate. You breathe slowly, flex fingers and toes periodically, and lean gently against a fellow soldier. The cold remains persistent and patient, but your awareness, preparation and subtle movements form a quiet barrier against it. And as the night continues, you realize that standing watch is not merely an obligation. It is a disciplined practice of maintaining warmth, alertness and presence, a delicate negotiation between body, mind and the biting cold that surrounds you. You sit quietly, your hands cupped together, as if holding invisible embers. The night air is relentless, seeping through the smallest gaps in your cloak and layers. Yet you notice that even tiny tricks, almost instinctive, can create meaningful warmth. A handful of straw pressed beneath your cloak, a small heated stone tucked carefully against the body, or even a brief rubbing of palms together. These subtle strategies can make the difference between shivering and tolerable comfort. You watch others experimenting quietly around the camp. One soldier lifts a small fragment of glowing embers from a dying fire, wrapping it carefully in a cloth before pressing it against his chest. The heat radiates slowly, a fragile yet potent source of internal warmth. You feel a fleeting envy at the ingenuity, then recognize that such improvisation is part of the rhythm of surviving bitter nights. Movement itself becomes a method. Gentle stretching, slow rotations of arms and legs, tapping feet against the frozen ground. Each action is purposeful, a counter to the creeping cold. You notice how subtle adjustments in posture, curling, slightly hunching shoulders or leaning forward, can trap air against the body, amplifying the insulating effects of layers and cloaks. The smell of smoke drifts faintly from nearby fires, blending with the musky scent of wool leather and damp earth. It is grounding, a reminder that even in minimal conditions, warmth exists if handled thoughtfully. Sensory awareness, you realize, is as crucial as physical adaptations. Recognizing patterns of heat, sound, and airflow allows the body to respond proactively. Improvised heating methods extend beyond movement and small embers. Some soldiers reportedly placed heated stones beneath their cloaks or furs, carefully managing the risk of burns. Others use small braziers or coals, balancing warmth against the dangers of fire inside makeshift shelters. Scholars still debate how common these practices were, but all accounts agree that creativity and vigilance were essential. You wrap your cloak more snugly around your torso, pressing furs against your legs. Tiny shifts, barely perceptible, make a noticeable difference. Even the distribution of body weight over straw or hides beneath you affects how heat is retained. You become hyper-aware of every tactile sensation, the pressure of fabric, the resistance of layers, the subtle warmth radiating from embers or fellow soldiers. Some soldiers use small, clever methods to preserve heat in specific areas. Tucking spare cloth into gloves, rolling sleeves over forearms, or folding furs beneath the back could trap pockets of warm air. Even simple acts like curling into a ball or pressing shoulders against companions amplified the effectiveness of layers. You observe the quiet ingenuity, realizing that endurance was both creative and methodical. The night is alive with soft sounds, faint rustles of fabric, the crackle of distant fires, and the occasional low murmur of conversation. You notice how these noises mark the rhythms of survival. Movement is deliberate and coordinated, almost meditative, with each subtle adjustment reinforcing the collective effort to resist the cold. You glance at a fellow soldier pressing a small heated stone against his chest. You sense the delicate balance required. Too close and it could burn, too far and the warmth dissipates. Every small detail matters, and every tiny adaptation compounds over hours into meaningful comfort. Even improvised solutions carry weight far beyond their size or apparent simplicity. Historians note that soldiers' use of small heat sources varied widely. Some regions emphasized heated stones, while others relied on embers or shared body warmth. Documentation is sparse, leaving room for debate, but the ingenuity of improvised solutions is consistently acknowledged. The principle remains clear. Adaptability was essential for surviving freezing nights. You adjust your hands again, rubbing palms, flexing fingers, rotating wrists. Each subtle movement releases warmth, circulates blood, and preserves life in extremities vulnerable to frostbite. These small, almost invisible actions accumulate into a sustainable, enduring defense against the cold. The air inside the camp remains still yet unforgiving. Even with cloaks, furs, and small embers, the cold presses insistently testing every layer and adaptation. You notice how psychological resilience matters as much as physical preparedness. Awareness, attention, and a willingness to experiment quietly are as crucial as the materials themselves. You lean back slightly, pressing a fur against your legs while cupping a heated stone to your chest. The sensation is fragile, momentary, yet comforting. It is a delicate balance, a conversation between body material and environment. Survival in the freezing night depends on the sum of countless small deliberate acts, and as the embers flicker faintly, you realize that ingenuity, patience, and careful attention are as powerful as any blanket or cloak. The cold persists relentless and patient, but through subtle improvisation you find temporary relief, a rhythm of endurance that carries you through the dark hours of the night. The frost has thickened across the camp, glittering faintly under the pale light of the moon. You step carefully over uneven patches of frozen earth, noticing how the chill varies depending on exposure and elevation. Soldiers travelling from warmer regions would have felt this difference keenly, their bodies unaccustomed to sustained cold. Each movement is a negotiation with the environment, a subtle adaptation to a climate that is both indifferent and persistent. You tuck your cloak more securely around your shoulders, aware that the wind here carries a sharper bite than in the southern valleys. Even minor drafts find the smallest openings slipping under folds of fabric or between layers. You flex your fingers and toes, prompting warmth to circulate. Movement is crucial. Stillness allows the cold to sink deeper, especially when temperatures drop well below freezing. Different regions demanded different strategies. In Northern Europe, soldiers relied heavily on layered clothing furs and careful use of fires, whereas milder climates permitted lighter garments and less intensive heat management. You imagine the logistical challenges faced by commanders trying to equip soldiers adequately for winter campaigns. Access to appropriate materials could determine survival as much as skill in battle. You notice a nearby fire struggling against the wind. Its small flames flicker unpredictably, sending brief sparks into the night air. Soldiers cluster close, shifting weight and positioning themselves to maximize heat. Some huddle in groups, pressing shoulders and elbows together, while others rotate slowly to share the warmth. Every gesture is deliberate, a quiet choreography learned from repeated exposure to cold campaigns. In harsher climates, blankets and furs were often supplemented with heated stones or small embers placed under bedding. These improvised heat sources required careful management to avoid burns or fire hazards, yet their sheer value was immense. Even a partially warmed stone could radiate heat for hours, providing comfort to soldiers resting on frozen ground. Scholars still debate the frequency and effectiveness of these practices given the variability in historical records, but their ingenuity is undisputed. You shift slightly, curling your legs closer beneath your cloak. The subtle contact traps air between layers, amplifying insulation. You can feel the warmth from the fire behind you radiating softly through the fabric, yet you also notice gaps where the wind sneaks in. Small adjustments repeated patiently create micro-environments of comfort in an otherwise harsh landscape. Some soldiers employed regional tricks like layering furs over bedding in specific configurations or arranging straw to cover particularly cold areas of the ground. In Scandinavian campaigns, tightly bound cloaks and overlapping hides were essential, Whereas southern troops might rely more on heavier tunics and dense wool layers, the principle remains consistent: adapt local materials and knowledge to the specific climate. You notice the faint smell of smoke and wet leather mixing with the earthy scent of frost-hardened soil. These olfactory cues are grounding, offering reassurance of human presence and survival. Even in isolation, the senses provide subtle comfort, a reminder that warmth can be found not just physically, but through observation, awareness, and resourcefulness. A soldier nearby adjusts a fur over his shoulders, tucking it to block wind that curls unpredictably through gaps in his cloak. His motions are slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. You observe and mimic, subtly aware that each adjustment preserves warmth and reduces exposure. These minor practices, refined over countless nights, demonstrate a quiet mastery of the victory condition. Insoles. Movement, heat, and layering converge in a delicate balance. You flex your wrists and ankles, feel the warmth circulating in response, and notice how proximity to others contributes to collective insulation. Shared warmth, small fires, and carefully arranged bedding combine to form an almost imperceptible network of defense against the cold. Historians note that northern campaigns often pause during the coldest months, recognizing that even experienced soldiers could only endure so much. Yet survival depended on understanding regional variations, wind direction, altitude, and ground moisture all affected how cold was experienced and countered. Soldiers who mastered these subtleties fared far better than those relying on uniform strategies. You shift slightly again, adjusting a fur beneath your back and pulling a cloak more tightly around your torso. The wind presses persistently at the edges, yet the combined effects of layering movement and local improvisation offer a small victory against the night. The body becomes a living experiment in thermal management, responding minute by minute to both environment and effort. As the hours stretch on, the night teaches patience. Each small adjustment is both a response and a preparation, an ongoing negotiation between exposure and comfort. You sense the quiet ingenuity embedded in these practices, strategies that vary subtly with geography, yet serve the universal goal: enduring the cold until morning. And in this deepening night you recognize that survival is never uniform. It is tailored, responsive, and attentive, a reflection of the environment itself, demanding mindfulness, creativity, and respect. You notice the distinction immediately. The knights move with measured grace, their cloaks heavy and often lined with fur, while the foot soldiers rely on patched wool and layered tunics. Wealthier warriors enjoyed access to materials that offered superior insulation, allowing them to endure the cold with less discomfort. You feel the difference instinctively, noticing how your own layers shift and compress compared to the more structured garments of those higher in rank. Armor adds another layer of complexity. While it offers protection in battle, metal plates conduct cold efficiently, drawing heat away from the body. A knight wearing mail or plate armor beneath his thick cloak experiences a paradox. The layers shield him from wind, yet metal presses cold directly into the skin. You adjust your own layers mentally, considering how these contrasting factors, protection versus insulation, play into survival strategies. Foot soldiers face a different challenge entirely. Their armor is minimal or non-existent, replaced by practical wool, leather, and fur. You notice how they curl slightly when resting, conserving warmth, or how they tuck blankets and furs strategically around exposed joints. Each method is born of necessity, a quiet ingenuity, honed by repeated exposure to bitter nights. The contrast is clear: status dictates comfort, but resourcefulness defines survival. You observe the subtle hierarchy in clothing quality, a visual map of privilege and adaptation. Knights' garments are heavier, more refined, and often layered with furs imported from distant regions. Foot soldiers' apparel is rougher, stitched from whatever materials were available locally. Yet even these simple layers, combined with cloaks, furs, and movement, provide a functional defense against the night. A faint aroma of smoke and sweat drifts past you, mingling with the icy scent of frost-covered ground. It is a reminder that survival is as much about human adaptation as it is about materials. You notice how foot soldiers exchange tips quietly, folding cloaks differently, layering more effectively, or positioning themselves to maximize collective warmth. Learning is ongoing, passed silently through observation and imitation. Even within the same camp, strategies vary. Some soldiers wrap multiple tunics beneath their cloaks, while others layer furs externally for maximum insulation. The decisions are practical, responding to climate-available resources and physical constitution. Scholars still debate how consistent these strategies were across regions, but the principle remains: adaptability is crucial and ingenuity often compensates for lack of wealth. Movement remains a critical factor. Knights may have less need to constantly shift thanks to superior insulation, whereas foot soldiers must flex, shift, and occasionally pace to maintain circulation. Every small motion helps retain warmth, especially in extremities like hands and feet. You notice yourself mimicking these subtle adjustments, curling, slightly rotating wrist ankle. You observe the use of cloaks differently as well. A knight may drape a cloak elegantly over shoulders and torso, while a foot soldier layers it, wraps it, or folds it beneath himself for extra insulation. Function supersedes appearance, and the methods of adaptation reflect priorities in endurance over elegance, practicality over prestige. Sleeping arrangements highlight another divide. Knights may have small furs or straw mattresses, often layered, while foot soldiers improvise with straw hides and compact cloaks. Even minimal layering can make a substantial difference, particularly when the ground itself is frozen and unforgiving. You adjust your body slightly, testing how layers of fabric and fur can be arranged to replicate these protective effects. You notice how foot soldiers compensate collectively, huddling together, layering blankets or cloaks in shared piles, or pressing bodies close to retain heat, demonstrates an understanding of collective insulation. Knights more insulated individually may not need to rely as heavily on proximity, though social and tactical considerations sometimes encourage clustering anyway. Historical accounts indicate that disparities in clothing and bedding significantly affected comfort and health. Frostbite, hypothermia, and exhaustion were far more common among lower-ranking troops, highlighting the role of resourcefulness alongside material access. Scholars still debate the frequency and severity of these conditions, but the pattern is clear. Wealth grants advantage, ingenuity levels the playing field. You shift again, wrapping a cloak more tightly around your shoulders, pressing furs strategically against your back and legs. Movement and layering combine subtly, a dance of endurance influenced by the lessons you observe among both knights and foot soldiers. Each adjustment is deliberate, reinforcing warmth while minimizing exposure. And as the night continues, you realize that survival is a nuanced negotiation. Status shapes access, ingenuity defines outcome, and awareness dictates success. The cold remains persistent, yet the combination of clothing layering and human ingenuity offers a fragile, enduring shield against the relentless winter night. You pause, noticing the subtle heat radiating from your own body, a quiet warmth generated from within. Even as the night presses in from all sides, there is a steady pulse, a reminder that your metabolism itself is a fragile, reliable fire. Every sip of broth, every bite of bread from earlier has contributed to this internal furnace, and now it works in tandem with layers, cloaks, and furs to resist the cold. Movement, no matter how slight, amplifies this effect. You stretch your arms slowly, flex fingers and toes, and feel the warmth circulate in gentle waves through your limbs. Blood flow becomes a critical ally, delivering the body's own heat to extremities most at risk from frost. Even small gestures, curling into a ball, shifting weight, pressing shoulders together, conserve precious energy while enhancing insulation. You notice that the rhythm of internal heat mirrors the slow pace of camp life. Soldiers balance effort and stillness, alternating between activity to maintain circulation and patience to conserve energy. The body becomes a living system, generating and distributing warmth with a precision honed by necessity. You feel it subtly now, a quiet, almost imperceptible hum beneath the layers of clothing and furs. Some historical sources suggest that soldiers deliberately consumed hot, high-calorie foods to maintain this internal furnace. Meat grain and fats provide energy that translates into heat, while hot liquids like broth or wine offer a temporary immediate boost. Scholars debate the prevalence of these practices, but the principle is consistent: fuel the body and it will defend against the cold. You notice the faint shift of wind outside rustling tents and cloaks. The external chill is relentless, yet your internal warmth persists, buffered by layers and mindful movement. Even when embers die low or the fire dwindles, this heat remains a vital resource, one that cannot be stolen or extinguished. It is yours to maintain through careful nourishment and subtle, deliberate activity. Your breathing carries warmth outward in faint clouds, visible only briefly before the cold carries it away. You adjust your cloak slightly, tucking furs closer to your torso, feeling the soft contact add another layer of insulation. Even minimal adjustments improve the efficiency of your internal heat, a delicate balance between body clothing and environment. You notice a soldier nearby rubbing his hands together, pressing them to his chest, then to his boots. These micro-movements are both practical and instinctive, a recognition that extremities demand special attention. Fingers, toes, ears, and the nose lose warmth fastest, and even the smallest gestures can prolong comfort. You mirror the practice, subtly feeling warmth returning gradually to the tips of your fingers. Some armies use subtle metabolic techniques as well. Gentle pacing, shifting body posture, and periodic stretching stimulated circulation and generated heat without exhausting energy reserves. Scholars still debate whether these methods were formally taught or developed through trial and error, yet the principle remains: the body itself is a tool in the fight against cold. You notice the slow hum of life around you, the rustle of cloaks, the soft shuffle of boots, the faint crackle of embers. These sounds underscore the rhythm of endurance and unspoken coordination between soldiers and environment. Each movement, no matter how slight, contributes to both physical warmth and collective morale. Even during long periods of stillness, awareness of internal heat is crucial. You feel your chest expand and contract, the pulse of blood beneath the layers, the subtle warmth rising from the core outward. This internal fire, coupled with layers and shared proximity, becomes the primary defense against hypothermia and exhaustion. Historical records emphasize the importance of diet and metabolism in winter campaigns. Hot meals and calorie-dense foods were as critical as cloaks or furs, a fact sometimes overlooked in romanticized depictions of soldiers enduring the cold. Fuel the body, maintain circulation, and survival becomes attainable even when fire and shelter are limited. You take a slow breath, letting your hands rest gently on your thighs. The internal warmth radiates, gradually stabilizing your shivering muscles. Even in the harshness of the frozen camp, this quiet heat is constant, reliable, and deeply personal. It is subtle, often unnoticed, yet it sustains you in ways that cloaks, fires, or blankets cannot fully replicate. And as you lean slightly into the layers of furs and wool, you recognize the delicate partnership between body and environment. Metabolism, movement, and nourishment converge into a steady internal warmth, a silent companion in the frozen night guarding you in its quiet, persistent way. You notice a subtle stiffness in your joints, a creeping reminder that the cold does not merely chill the surface, it penetrates, affecting muscles, circulation, and even the immune system. Soldiers in medieval camps were vulnerable to a range of illnesses exacerbated by frost and damp, from respiratory infections to chilblains and more serious fevers. The body, already taxed by exposure and exertion, becomes fertile ground for minor ailments to escalate. A cough drifts faintly through the camp, dry and rasping, carried by the still air. You flinch, slightly aware of how quickly illness could spread in close quarters. Even small infections could become debilitating, especially during winter campaigns, when resources were scarce and medical care rudimentary. You shift slightly, pressing your cloak closer and wrapping furs more tightly, a subtle act of self-preservation beyond simply retaining warmth. Frostbite and hypothermia were constant threats, but so too were diseases that thrived in damp, crowded conditions. You notice the slight odour of damp wool mingled with smoke and earth, a reminder that moisture, even from breath or sweat, could encourage mould or bacterial growth. Soldiers learned to mitigate these hazards through ventilation and careful attention to clothing and layering, though success was never guaranteed. You shift your weight, flexing fingers and toes, acutely aware of subtle numbness creeping through extremities. Early intervention rubbing limbs, adjusting clothing, rotating positions could prevent serious harm. Soldiers developed an intuitive sense of their own thresholds, recognizing the signs before discomfort escalated into injury. Observation of both self and companions became critical. Some accounts suggest that camp routines included small rituals to stave off illness. Hot teas or broths, brief exposure to embers, and communal positioning for shared warmth were all part of an informal medical practice. Scholars still debate how systematic these routines were, but evidence suggests that experienced observation and peer advice played a crucial role in maintaining health under harsh winter conditions. The wind rises again, slipping under tents and through cloaks, carrying the faint tang of smoke from distant fires. You pull a fur tighter across your torso, pressing it against your chest and back, feeling the warmth radiate gently. Even minor sources of insulation, when combined with movement and careful layering, reduce the body's vulnerability to both cold and illness. You notice soldiers around you coughing or sniffing quietly, their discomfort muted by fatigue and vigilance. Such minor ailments could slow movement, diminish endurance, and increase susceptibility to more serious conditions. The constant presence of cold amplifies these risks, making preventive measures, insulation, warmth, nourishment, and rest critical to survival. Even seemingly trivial practices like keeping cloaks dry or rotating damp furs carried health implications. Moisture, cold, and pressure combined to weaken the body, creating opportunities for infection. You feel the texture of your layers, noticing where fabric is damp or compressed, and instinctively adjust. Every detail counts, each subtle correction contributing to resilience. Historical accounts emphasize that illness shaped the rhythm of medieval campaigns as much as battles themselves. Winter often slowed or paused operations not solely due to weather, but because soldiers' bodies could only endure so much exposure before health faltered. Scholars continue to examine the relationship between environment, disease, and endurance, highlighting the delicate interplay between survival and vulnerability. You press your hands lightly against your chest, feeling the internal warmth generated by movement and nourishment. Even as frost creeps along exposed areas, your core remains steady, a subtle anchor against the cold's advance. Awareness of these internal signals allows you to act preemptively, adjust layers, redistribute insulation, and maintain circulation. Some soldiers reportedly carried small herbal remedies, poultices, or simple ointments, attempting to stave off infection or treat minor wounds aggravated by cold. The efficacy of these treatments is uncertain, but their presence reflects a practical understanding maintaining a health required constant attention, creativity, and observation. You breathe slowly, letting your body relax into the rhythm of warmth and vigilance. The cold is persistent but controlled, mediated by layers movement and shared knowledge. Even minor ailments managed carefully need not become debilitating, and as the night stretches on, you feel a quiet awareness of your body's fragility and resilience, understanding that survival is not only about heat and shelter, but also about safeguarding health in an environment that amplifies every weakness. You notice movement at the edge of the camp, figures bending and shifting, tending quietly to tasks even in the freezing darkness. Camp followers, often women, children, and elderly servants, play a crucial but understated role in survival. Their presence brings more than labour. It offers warmth, sustenance, and vigilance, subtly transforming the environment for soldiers who would otherwise face the cold entirely alone. You approach and observe as a few tend to small fires, replenishing embers with carefully gathered wood. The warmth radiates outward, brushing your fingers and face as you lean closer. Smoke curls upward, mingling with the faint scent of wool, and frost-laden earth, creating a sensory cocoon of faint heat and human presence. The combination of body's fire and careful layering amplifies comfort beyond what any single soldier could achieve. Camp followers prepare simple meals, hot broths, bread and stews, distributing them carefully to those on watch or tending the sick. You notice the rhythmic movement, deliberate and efficient as they rotate tasks and manage both heat and food. Their efforts are as much about survival as convenience. A hot meal or a replenished ember can mean the difference between enduring the night and succumbing to frost or fatigue. The subtle warmth of their bodies adds another layer of insulation for soldiers. Sitting nearby, exchanging quiet words or sharing a cloak while food is distributed creates microclimates of comfort. Heat passes through proximity's shared furs and overlapping layers. You feel this subtly, noticing how small gestures, handing a bowl, draping a blanket, translate into tangible warmth. Historians still argue over the extent of these contributions. Some suggest that camp followers were omnipresent and integral, while others posit that their involvement was limited to larger or wealthier armies. Yet all accounts agree that human assistance significantly increased comfort and endurance during freezing nights. The combination of labour, care and presence creates a resilience that cannot be underestimated. You observe the meticulous care with which they tend fires. Embers are rearranged wood stacked just so shields or cloth positioned as rudimentary windbreaks. Each minor adjustment amplifies heat retention, a quiet engineering of survival. Even the smallest fire carefully managed spreads warmth more effectively when complemented by attentive bodies nearby. Food preparation extends beyond mere sustenance. Hot liquids, dense breads and stews provide energy that fuels the body's internal warmth. You sip a small portion of broth offered, noticing how it spreads through your chest and limbs, reinforcing the warmth generated by movement and layered clothing. Nutrition, you realize, is not a luxury. It is a fundamental component of enduring extreme cold. Some camp followers also attend to the sick or frostbitten, layering blankets, tending fires, or assisting with minor care. Their work is quiet, rarely chronicled, yet essential. Even a small intervention, adjusting a cloak, wrapping an injured hand, or sharing heat through proximity, can dramatically influence survival in the harsh conditions of winter campaigns. You hear the faint rustle of fabric and the soft murmur of voices as blankets are adjusted and fires coaxed back to life. The night is cold, but these subtle activities create pockets of resilience, micro-environments where the biting chill is tempered by attentive care. You notice how even a brief gesture, a fur draped over shoulders, a cloak tucked under the back, changes the dynamics of heat exchange and comfort. The wind outside continues its persistent whisper, threading through the edges of tents and flaps. Yet inside, near fires and bodies, the cold feels slowed, softened, mediated. You lean slightly closer to a companion, sharing the warmth of overlapping cloaks and the gentle heat of adjacent bodies. The effect is cumulative, subtle, and profoundly practical. Historians note that the contribution of camp followers is often underrepresented, yet their presence was vital. Their labour, attentiveness and coordination amplified soldiers' endurance, providing physical warmth, nourishment and psychological reassurance. Even brief contact or shared proximity improved both morale and survival odds during extended campaigns. You notice how small repeated gestures, tucking a cloak, shifting slightly closer, rearranging embers, combine with human presence to create an environment of subtle comfort. Each interaction carries practical significance, enhancing warmth and ensuring the night's endurance. As the hours stretch, the presence of others, both soldiers and camp followers, forms a quiet, supportive network. Bodies, fires and hot meals converge into a fragile yet reliable system of survival. You feel a sense of shared resilience, a collective strategy that amplifies individual endurance. And in this delicate balance, you understand that winter survival is never solitary. Warmth, care and vigilance are intertwined, and the quiet work of camp followers becomes an invisible but vital thread in the tapestry of endurance, softening the relentless night with human presence and subtle ingenuity. You trudge slowly through snow-crusted paths between tents, the crunch beneath your boots echoing faintly in the still night. Winter campaigns were notoriously brutal, and even the most experienced soldiers understood that marching guarding or standing watch in freezing conditions tested endurance beyond the battlefield. You feel each step amplify the chill seeping through layers, a reminder that movement is both necessity and defense. Snowflakes drift lightly from the darkened sky, settling on cloaks and boots, melting into damp spots that threaten to steal warmth. You adjust your cloak around your shoulders and tuck furs more securely beneath your torso. Each movement is deliberate, conserving heat, while ensuring your legs remain mobile for the next stretch of ground. The cold is persistent, patient, and utterly indifferent. Marching through snow amplifies the challenges of endurance. Every step compresses boots, forcing cold air and moisture against the feet. Soldiers improvised, constantly stuffing boots with straw or cloth, wearing multiple layers of socks, and pacing to maintain circulation. Each tactic is subtle yet critical, a quiet conversation with the environment itself. You pause briefly to catch your breath, noticing the frozen terrain beneath your boots. It is uneven and treacherous, demanding careful attention. Missteps could lead to sprains, frostbite, or exhaustion. The effort required to move across snow and ice consumes energy rapidly, making nourishment and internal warmth all the more important. You adjust the straps of your cloak and the folds of your tunic, feeling every layer respond to the motion. Winter campaigns often forced armies to adapt their movements strategically. Extended marches were avoided during extreme cold, and commanders timed operations to maximize daylight and minimize exposure. Yet unavoidable campaigns pushed soldiers into prolonged exertion in sub-zero conditions. The environment dictated pace and rest, shaping both tactics and survival strategies. You notice how your own body responds. Muscles tighten, circulation increases, and subtle shivering serves as a last line of internal defense. You flex your fingers inside gloves and press toes against insulated layers. Each micro-adjustment is critical, maintaining warmth while preserving energy for the long march ahead. Fires along the route are rare. Small braziers or embers are sometimes maintained at temporary halts, but prolonged warmth is difficult to achieve on the move. Soldiers rely on clothing-layered furs and body heat. Even shared proximity during brief rests is vital, offering fleeting warmth in an otherwise unforgiving landscape. Historians note that winter campaigns were often suspended entirely in extreme conditions. Snow ice and freezing ground forced pauses in operations, as soldiers' bodies could endure only so much. Yet urgent military needs sometimes required persistence, leaving troops exposed to relentless cold for hours or even days. The physical and psychological strain was immense, testing both endurance and ingenuity. You hear the faint murmur of companions nearby, the shuffle of boots and occasional coughs. Even in motion, the cold is persistent. You tuck furs tighter around your torso, adjust the folds beneath your legs, and notice how subtle corrections reduce the sensation of freezing. Every act of attention compounds, creating small cumulative advantages in an otherwise hostile environment. Some soldiers employed clever improvisations during marches, wrapping cloaks in multiple layers, creating windbreaks with shields, or alternating movement rhythms to preserve circulation. Scholars still debate the consistency of these practices, but evidence suggests that adaptive techniques were widely used, refined over successive campaigns. Each small decision was a lifeline against the cold. You glance across the snow, noting frost forming on cloaks, boots, and exposed furs. Even minor exposure alters insulation. Soldiers adjusted frequently, using simple gestures, curling hands, repositioning cloaks, or huddling briefly with companions to minimize heat loss. These small interventions, repeated diligently, form the subtle backbone of endurance in freezing conditions. The terrain itself becomes a partner in survival. Low-lying areas may hold frost and moisture, while higher ground offers wind exposure but firmer footing. Soldiers intuitively assess these risks, altering pace and posture to preserve warmth. Awareness of subtle environmental cues is as crucial as clothing or nourishment. You notice your breath forming thin clouds fleeting against the darkened sky. It is a visual reminder of heat lost and gained, the constant negotiation between your body and the elements. Even in motion, every gesture, step rotation or adjustment shapes how cold penetrates or recedes. As you trudge on, you understand that winter campaigns demand more than endurance. They demand attentiveness, improvisation, and respect for the environment. The ground, wind, and snow are as influential as armor, cloaks, or fire, and the balance between exposure and survival is delicate and ongoing. And as the night stretches on, each step becomes both exertion and strategy, a continuous dialogue between body, clothing, and environment, teaching lessons in resilience, patience, and the quiet art of surviving freezing nights. You crouch low, feeling the sharp edge of frozen earth beneath your body. Straw cloth and furs have been piled beneath you, creating a fragile barrier against the relentless cold. It is far from luxurious, but every layer provides a critical buffer, softening the impact of the icy ground and preserving whatever heat you have managed to retain. Even minor adjustments, folding a cloak differently, pressing a fur closer to the skin, can create meaningful differences in warmth and comfort. The texture beneath your back is uneven, coarse in places, soft in others. You run your fingers across it, noting where straw shifts or cloth bunches. Each section of insulation traps air differently, amplifying the effect of your layered clothing. You tuck your cloak further beneath your torso, fold the edges of furs to cover knees and ankles, and feel the small but significant change as heat is retained more effectively. Sleeping arrangements in medieval camps were rarely neat or uniform. Soldiers improvised constantly, arranging what was available, straw hides, spare cloaks into a workable bed. Some layered furs over straw, while others placed damp or compressed materials beneath to create firmness. You notice how these micro-adjustments balance comfort with insulation, turning crude materials into a surprisingly effective system against the cold. The air carries faint hints of smoke, wool, and the earthy scent of straw, grounding you in the sensory reality of survival. Even minor odors become markers of security, signaling the presence of life, warmth, and shared effort. You inhale slowly, letting the combination of scent, texture, and subtle heat reinforce your sense of endurance. You notice fellow soldiers nearby adjusting their own bedding. A cloak is repositioned, furs shifted slightly, and the collective rustle of fabric forms a muted rhythm across the camp. Movement is minimal but deliberate, each gesture designed to preserve warmth while conserving energy. The night is silent enough that every small sound is perceptible, yet there is no chaos, only a quiet, cooperative vigilance. Insulation extends beyond blankets and furs. Soldiers sometimes used additional materials like small bundles of straw or extra cloth, tucking them beneath knees, shoulders, or along the torso. These minor additions create pockets of trapped air, subtle but effective at reducing heat loss to the frozen ground. Scholars debate the frequency and standardization of these practices, yet they appear repeatedly in anecdotal accounts across regions. You shift slightly, curling your legs toward your chest. The movement reduces its exposed surface area and helps concentrate internal warmth. Even minor postural adjustments have meaningful effects when the ground is cold and the night long. Each layer, cloak, tunic, furs, and straw works in concert with your body, creating a delicate network of heat retention. You feel the weight of your own clothing, heavy yet protective. The compression against the ground enhances the contact between layers, allowing heat to circulate subtly while reducing gaps where cold can infiltrate. Each fold and tuck is deliberate, a small act of ingenuity repeated instinctively across countless winter nights. Nearby you notice a soldier pressing his shoulders closer to a companion, sharing warmth. Huddling even briefly complements the insulation provided by materials alone. Heat radiates slowly between bodies, amplified when combined with cloaks and furs. The principle is simple, yet powerful proximity enhances endurance. The wind sighs faintly outside the tent or shelter, a persistent reminder that nothing is impervious. Inside the layers and careful positioning create relative stability. You sense the microclimate you have constructed warm enough to endure insulated from the worst of the chill. It is fragile but effective, a product of observation practice and subtle improvisation. Sleeping in these conditions is never passive. Even when still, the body and mind are active, adjusting to preserve warmth. Tiny shivers, shifts of limbs, and the realignment of layers constitute a continuous dialogue between body material and environment. You notice it now, a quiet rhythm of survival that runs beneath conscious thought. Historical records suggest that these makeshift sleeping arrangements were surprisingly effective, though comfort remained minimal. Straw furs and cloaks, when combined thoughtfully, allowed soldiers to rest without succumbing to frostbite or debilitating cold. Scholars debate precise methods, but the principle of layered insulation against frozen ground is consistent across campaigns and regions. You press the edge of a cloak under your neck, tuck furs around your legs, and feel the subtle warmth radiate through the contact points. Even slight shifts amplify the effect, enhancing the protective envelope you have created against the harshness of the night. And as you lie quietly cocooned in straw cloaks and furs, you sense the deliberate care embedded in every gesture, the quiet ingenuity that transforms rough materials into survival tools, and the patient endurance that defines life on frozen ground during a medieval winter. You close your eyes, briefly feeling the persistent pressure of cold pressing through layers, and realize that the challenge is as much mental as it is physical. Endurance of freezing nights demands more than cloaks or bedding. It requires patience, focus, and the ability to tolerate discomfort without panic. Soldiers had to quiet their minds, steady their breathing, and resist the urge to move excessively, which could sap precious energy while still failing to stave off the cold. The night is silent, save for faint rustles of cloaks, the soft sigh of breath, and the occasional distant crackle of embers. You notice how these minor sounds, though subdued, shape your perception of space and safety. Every subtle noise can carry meaning. A companion shifting a wind gust, brushing a tent flap, or a distant shuffle that signals the presence of another human. Awareness sharpens naturally, a necessary adaptation to survive long hours in harsh conditions. You draw your cloak closer, curling slightly to conserve body heat. The sensation is grounding. Even minor postural adjustments create measurable changes in warmth. Soldiers learn to integrate these movements into a quiet rhythmic practice, one that blends instinct with observation. You flex fingers and toes periodically, each small act a deliberate reinforcement of your body's defenses. The psychological strain of constant cold is subtle but profound. You feel it in the slow fatigue that seeps into muscles, the mental weight of knowing that every exposed moment increases risk. Soldiers relied on routine habit and shared strategies to mitigate this strain. Huddling, adjusting layers, maintaining vigilance and pacing were all part of a carefully cultivated rhythm that balanced endurance with awareness. Even small rituals, wrapping a cloak just so, arranging furs beneath a back-rotating position, slightly carry both physical and psychological benefits. You notice how minor attention to detail produces a sense of control. In an environment largely beyond your influence, these small victories provide reassurance, helping maintain morale and focus through the long hours of night. You observe companions nearby, their movements slow and deliberate. Some tuck additional furs beneath their legs, others rotate shoulders or shift weight to preserve circulation. The camp operates as a subtle network of mutual vigilance and shared knowledge. Each soldier, through practice and observation, becomes both participant and teacher, reinforcing patterns of endurance. Scholars still debate the exact mental strategies soldiers employed. Some argue that meditation or visualization was used to suppress shivering, while others suggest simple focus on practical tasks, adjusting. Clothing tending fires was sufficient to maintain calm. The principle, however, remains clear. Mental endurance is inseparable from physical resilience in freezing conditions. You notice the interplay between thought and sensation. Each twinge of cold triggers subtle responses, flexing fingers, pressing furs closer, curling the body. Awareness amplifies survival. Anticipation allows preemptive action rather than reaction after discomfort has already set in. The mind becomes an active participant in thermal regulation, guiding the body with careful precision. The wind outside rustles faintly, threading between tents and flaps. You adjust your layers, instinctively aware of every draft and edge. Each micro-adjustment, folding a cloak, pressing a fur, curling slightly, creates a private pocket of warmth. You feel the subtle reassurance of control, even in a night dominated by relentless cold. Endurance also relies on communal observation. Sharing tips, noticing techniques among companions, and imitating effective gestures builds collective resilience. Even minor corrections observed and copied increase overall comfort and reduce the likelihood of exposure-related illness or frostbite. You feel yourself internalizing these lessons through quiet observation and repeated adjustments. The night seems to stretch infinitely, yet there is a rhythm: breathe, shift, tuck, tuck, flex. Each repetition reinforces both body and mind. Soldiers, whether consciously or instinctively, rely on this subtle meditative routine to survive long cold hours. You recognize the elegance in such simple repetition, a choreography designed to sustain life. You notice a faint glow from embers nearby, but the majority of warmth now comes from layering, proximity, and internal heat. The mind contributes by suppressing panic, focusing attention, and maintaining subtle vigilance. This quiet coordination of body, environment, and awareness forms the core of survival. And as you settle further into your layered cocoon, flexing and adjusting with deliberate care, you understand that endurance is as much a matter of mental discipline as physical preparation. In the deep, frozen hours of the night, patience, awareness, and subtle action are the most reliable tools a soldier possesses. The camp is hushed now, the night stretching vast and silent around you. Every sound is amplified: the soft rustle of cloaks, the gentle creak of straw shifting beneath bodies, even the faint exhale of breath forming clouds in the frigid air. You focus on these subtle noises, listening as they mark the rhythm of survival. In the absence of light, sound becomes a guide, a way to sense the presence of others, the fire's pulse, and the shifting wind. You shift slightly, curling into your cloak and furs, aware of the persistent cold pressing through layers. The wind drifts past, carrying its soft whistle through tents and gaps in shelter. You notice how proximity to others softens its impact, heat radiating slowly between shoulders and backs. Even minimal contact amplifies comfort, creating a network of subtle warmth that spreads through the camp without conscious effort. The frost beneath you crunches quietly as soldiers adjust their bedding, rearranging furs or adding straw to improve insulation. Each movement is deliberate, almost ritualistic, designed to maximize warmth while conserving energy. You mirror these small adjustments instinctively, curling slightly, pressing your back against the soft insulation and tucking cloaks closer around your body. You hear the faint, intermittent crackle of a distant fire, a reminder that heat is both precious and fleeting. Small embers radiate warmth, but the majority of comfort comes from layering movement and human presence. Every gesture, folding a cloak, shifting weight, huddling together, creates pockets of warmth, imperceptible individually but cumulatively powerful. Sleep itself is fragile in these conditions. Shivering discomfort and the subtle intrusion of dampness all threaten rest. Soldiers learn to anticipate these challenges, adjusting posture, layers, and proximity to others to maintain warmth while attempting to rest. Even a brief micro-adjustment, pressing a fur against the back or curling knees toward the chest, provides critical thermal advantage. You inhale slowly, noting the mingling scents: smoke, wool, leather, and the faint tang of frozen earth. These sensory markers are grounding, signaling safety, life, and the shared endurance of the camp. The olfactory landscape itself becomes a subtle comfort, a reminder that warmth exists even in minimal quantities. Some soldiers would rotate positions during the night, exchanging spots near embers or closer to companions to preserve comfort. Scholars still debate the consistency of such practices, Yet anecdotal evidence suggests that this quiet rotation reduced fatigue, prevented localized cold injuries, and allowed more uniform distribution of limited warmth. You shift your weight once more, noticing how the simple act of movement stimulates circulation. Flexing fingers and toes, curling slightly, adjusting a cloak or fur, each micro-motion sustains warmth and wards off the creeping chill. The night demands patience, rhythm, and constant attention to small details. The subtle harmony of sounds, whispers, rustles, distant embers creates a meditative cadence. Even in extreme cold, the human body and mind adapt. Awareness of the sound guides posture and positioning, reinforcing the unspoken coordination of survival. You feel a sense of calm as you integrate into this rhythm, aligning breath, movement, and attention with the flow of the camp. Faint shadows shift with the flicker of embers and distant firelight. You notice how darkness transforms perception, sharpening awareness of proximity and movement. Even the faintest gestures, adjusting layers, shifting position, have heightened significance in the night-altering comfort and reinforcing vigilance. The wind continues its quiet whistle, threading through gaps and testing shelter. You press a cloaks and furs more tightly, feeling heat radiate slowly through contact points. Each subtle adjustment reinforces the microclimates you and others have constructed, a testament to observation, adaptation, and repeated practice. You reflect on the role of sensory awareness in enduring freezing nights. Sight is limited, but sound, touch, and smell provide continuous feedback. The rustle of a cloak, the faint warmth radiating from a companion, the scent of embers, each informs adjustments guiding both body and mind towards stability and survival. And as you settle more fully into the quiet, rhythmic environment, listening, sensing, and adjusting with care, you realize that the sounds of a frozen camp are themselves a form of warmth. Awareness, connection, and subtle responsiveness become tools as vital as cloaks, furs, or fire guiding endurance through the night with gentle precision. You lie quietly listening to the camp and notice how easily misconceptions about medieval life creep into modern imagination. Stories often dramatize constant suffering, endless hardship, or heroic endurance without pause. Yet the reality is more nuanced. Soldiers combined practical strategies, improvisation, and subtle routines to endure freezing nights. Survival was rarely about dramatic heroics. It was built from countless small repeated actions, each quietly meaningful. You observe the careful arrangement of cloaks, furs, and bedding around you. Some soldiers wrap cloaks tightly, others fold furs beneath their bodies, and a few curl shoulder to shoulder with companions. These practices, while simple, reflect sophisticated knowledge of insulation, body heat, and airflow. Even minor errors, exposing a wrist or tucking a cloak too loosely, can amplify discomfort or increase the risk of frostbite. Popular myths sometimes suggest that soldiers slept in near-perfect warmth, or that fires and tents were sufficient to eliminate cold. You feel the truth in your own body. Warmth is hard-won, partial and fragile. The night is patient, pressing gently yet persistently against every exposed surface. Only careful layering, vigilance, and awareness of surroundings allow endurance. Some accounts exaggerate heroic acts, framing suffering as proof of courage or stoicism. You notice instead the quiet ingenuity present in mundane routines, adjusting layers, sharing proximity, and improvising insulation with straw hides or spare cloth. These practical solutions, often overlooked in romanticized depictions, reveal the real tools of survival. The air carries faint scents of spoke wool and earth. You inhale, slowly letting the familiar smells anchor you in the material reality of camp life. Even minor sensory cues provide reassurance, signaling presence, warmth, and human activity. The mind uses these cues to navigate discomfort, offering psychological relief alongside the tangible insulation of cloaks and furs. Historians still argue over details, how widespread certain strategies were, which techniques were regional, and how social status influenced access to resources. Some soldiers enjoyed layered cloaks and furs, while others relied on improvisation and shared warmth. The inconsistencies in the record leave room for interpretation, yet the underlying principle is clear: Endurance relied on creativity, observation, and adaptability. You adjust your cloak slightly, tucking the edges beneath your torso and pressing a fur closer to your legs. The subtle changes have immediate effects. Even small modifications to posture or fabric placement alter insulation, slow heat loss, and enhance comfort. You sense how these incremental adjustments accumulate into meaningful warmth over hours of exposure. You notice companions nearby making similar subtle changes. One soldier folds a cloak beneath his back, another shifts slightly closer to a companion to share heat. These actions are largely instinctive, developed through repeated experience and observation. Comfort is achieved collectively as well as individually, each body contributing to a network of resilience. Some misconceptions suggest that soldiers passively endured cold relying only on blankets or fires. You realize the opposite survival is proactive. Constant vigilance, micro-adjustments, and creative use of available materials form the true defenses against freezing nights. Heat is generated, preserved, and shared consciously minute by minute. You reflect on how imagination often simplifies medieval life, ignoring the subtle choreography of survival. Cloaks are layered furs, arranged movements, repeated meals consumed strategically, all contributing to a delicate balance between exposure and endurance. The reality, though less dramatic, is far more instructive. Survival was practical, attentive, and adaptive. The night is quiet yet alive, with movement, breath, and the faint rustle of fabric. You recognize that myths often obscure the small details that mattered most. Each adjustment shared warmth, and improvisation carries significance, illustrating the nuanced reality behind romanticized narratives. And as you settle into your layered cocoon, observing, adjusting, and reflecting, you understand that the true story of survival is in these subtle, repeated actions. It is not glory, but ingenuity, awareness, and quiet persistence that define endurance during freezing nights. You lie still for a moment, allowing your awareness to settle on the patterns of the night. Every sound, movement, and scent now carries meaning. The cold continues its quiet pressure, but you notice how the small strategies you've observed, from layering to rotation, from shared warmth to careful movement, have accumulated into a network of endurance. Survival, you realize, is a continuous negotiation with the elements, the body, and companions. You glance at nearby soldiers, noting subtle adjustments. A cloak tucked under a back, furs folded over knees, shoulders pressed together for shared heat. Each small gesture contributes to a broader strategy of persistence. There is no grandeur here, no dramatics, only deliberate, careful, patient action. Even the simplest adjustment can preserve warmth enough to endure hours of frozen night. The smell of damp earth, smoke, and wool hangs softly in the air. It is a faint but constant reminder that life continues despite the cold. You inhale slowly, feeling a subtle sense of comfort from these familiar markers. Even in the harshest condition, sensory cues, scent, sound, and texture offer reassurance and maintain connection to your environment and companions. You reflect on the broader lessons of endurance. Adaptation, ingenuity, and attentiveness were as important as clothing or furs. Soldiers improvise, constantly adjusting for wind, frost, or dampness, and sharing strategies quietly with each other. Each small intervention, folding a cloak differently, positioning a heated stone, or pressing closer to a companion, amplified survival. The night is both relentless and instructive. The wind threads through tents and gaps, testing layers and insulation. You respond instinctively, tucking cloaks, pressing furs, curling slightly to conserve heat. Each action, though small, reinforces the fragile balance between exposure and protection. You begin to see endurance not as passive suffering, but as deliberate, ongoing attention to detail. Internal warmth continues to play a subtle role. Muscles flex, circulation flows, and energy from meals slowly radiates through your body. Even small movements, wiggling fingers, rotating wrists, flexing ankles, sustain temperature in extremities. The body itself becomes an instrument of survival, working in harmony with materials and awareness to stave off the cold. You notice again the importance of human presence. Shared warmth, Quiet companionship and observation enhance both physical and psychological resilience. Even brief contact with a fellow soldier pressing a shoulder or overlapping cloaks translates into subtle but meaningful heat. The combination of body material and mindfulness forms a network that no individual layer alone could provide. Historians emphasize that winter campaigns were shaped as much by endurance strategies as by battles or tactics. Success often depended on knowledge of local climates, materials, and improvisation. Soldiers who mastered these subtle techniques survived more comfortably and avoided injury or illness. The lessons embedded in routine repetition and observation are as vital as any account of combat. You shift slightly, curling outward and adjusting furs and cloaks around your legs. The microclimate you have created is modest yet sufficient to resist the worst of the chill. Every fold, tuck, and adjustment contributes to cumulative warmth, forming a quiet living system of protection. The night stretches silent and patient. You feel the interplay of internal heat, layered insulation, and subtle movement sustaining your body. The cold persists, yet these combined strategies provide a quiet shield, fragile but enduring. And as you observe, adjust, and reflect, you understand that winter survival is not merely about clothing or shelter. It is about attentiveness, ingenuity, and subtle coordination. Every detail repeated patiently and consistently reveals a lesson in resilience and human adaptability, preparing you for the final hours of the frozen night. You exhale slowly, feeling the lingering chill pressing gently against your skin, softened by the layers of cloaks, furs, and straw beneath you. The night has been long, patient, and relentless, yet you sense that the culmination of strategies, layered clothing, shared warmth, careful movement, nourishment, and mindful attention has carried you through its most biting hours. The frost still clings to boots and cloaks, the wind still whispers outside, but within your small cocoon there is quiet triumph. The subtle heat from your own body, combined with the cumulative effect of shared warmth and layered materials, creates a fragile but reliable shield against the night. You feel the pressure of blankets and cloaks settling, the faint pulse of circulation in your fingers and toes, the warmth radiating from your chest through furs and wool. It is imperfect, yet enough. Endurance is never absolute. It is measured in small, repeated victories against the cold. You sense the stillness of the camp around you. Rustling fabric, faint exhalations, and the occasional crackle of embers whose form a muted symphony. Every sound, once distracting, now blends into a rhythm that lulls awareness toward calm and reflection. The collective presence of companions, the shared vigilance and subtle adjustments reinforces a quiet sense of security even in the deep hours of winter. The night teaches patience, and now you feel its lessons settling into your body. Each adjustment, tucking a cloak, pressing a fur closer, curling knees toward the chest, is both practical and meditative. Endurance becomes an art of subtlety, each small gesture reinforcing warmth, circulation, and psychological resilience. You begin to understand that survival is as much mental as physical, a continuous dance of awareness and action. The faint smell of smoke and damp wool mixes with the crisp scent of frost-covered earth. It is grounding, comforting, a sensory reminder that life continues even in the harshest of conditions. These subtle cues, often overlooked, become markers of safety and warmth, reinforcing vigilance while offering reassurance. You inhale slowly, letting the aromas settle into consciousness, anchoring you in the present. Your body adapts naturally, muscles relaxing into the protective envelope of layers beneath and around you. Shivering subsides, replaced by the steady hum of internal warmth, circulating through limbs and extremities. Each micro-adjustment, the curling of a toe, the shift of a shoulder, the tucking of a cloak, forms a delicate network of survival. It is quiet, almost imperceptible, yet profoundly effective. In these final hours before dawn, you sense the culmination of human ingenuity and resilience. Cloaks, furs, straw-heated stones, careful movement, shared warmth, and mindful attention have combined to create a fragile equilibrium. The night's relentless cold is present but tempered by layered preparation, observation, and the subtle rhythm of endurance. You reflect on the lessons embedded in these practices. Survival is never accidental, it emerges from repeated careful action. Awareness, adaptation, and creativity are as vital as fire or food. Even the smallest gestures adjusting layers, curling closer to a companion sipping warm broth, carry immense significance. In this quiet choreography of human endurance, each soldier becomes both observer and participant, navigating the night with patience and subtle intelligence. As the first faint light of dawn begins to appear on the horizon, the camp remains hushed. Snow and frost shimmer faintly, the wind has softened, and a fragile warmth has been preserved through countless small acts of endurance. You lie still, breathing slowly, feeling the interplay of body materials and human presence as a protective embrace. The night's lessons linger. Resilience is built quietly, endurance is practiced deliberately, and warmth is cultivated through attention, improvisation, and care. Every cloak for movement and shared breath has contributed to survival weaving, a tapestry of subtle triumph against the cold. And now, as the frozen night slowly gives way to morning, you allow yourself to drift into a gentle, calm sleep carried by the warmth you have earned, surrounded by the quiet vigilance and shared endurance of companions. The cold remains outside, but within there is peace, reflection, and the delicate comfort of survival through patience, creativity, and presence. The wind down is soft and slow. You notice how warmth, both internal and external, is not abrupt or forceful. It is gradual, cumulative, and quiet. Your muscles relax, your breath lengthens, and every shiver fades into the calm of layered insulation and attentive care. The camp breathes alongside you, steady, rhythmic, and enduring. You feel connected to the ground beneath, to the layers around you, to companions nearby, and to centuries of soldiers who have navigated nights like this. The cold has been persistent but respectful, tempered by preparation and human ingenuity. And as you drift further, the frozen landscape outside becomes a distant murmur replaced by the soft, enduring warmth that carries you into rest. Now the night's lessons settle fully into your mind. Patience, observation, subtlety, and care are the truest forms of warmth. The rhythm of survival continues in your body, slow, gentle, and unhurried. You exhale once more, letting the last tension slip away and drift peacefully into sleep. Sweet dreams.